Good evening. It's 7 o'clock now, so I'd like people to take their seats, please. Thank you. Good evening to the first, if you like, face-to-face planning committee meeting we've had for a long time. We are also on YouTube tonight, so I'd like to welcome all residents of Hounslow and anywhere elsewhere who may be watching tonight. Please forgive us if there are slight technicalities, as it is the very first time we've attempted this. There shouldn't be any major problems. I'm Councillor Corinna Smart, and I'm Chair of the Planning Committee. Okay, so moving on to the agenda. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Rajwinder Sidhu, and then there's nobody else, and I've seen it. I think I've seen everybody else. So, yeah, that's fine. Now, under declarations of interest under the Town Planning Code of Practice or any other communications from members, I'm going to take Councillor Guy Lambert first.
Thank you, Chair. As I have notified you, I'm going to stand down from the discussion on item 5, and I will leave the room because I'm sort of closely engaged with Lambton 360, who are the Lambton Development 360, who are the sponsors of this. And I feel, whilst I feel myself I could be unbiased, it certainly looks like it wouldn't look like I'm unbiased. And I've had extensive discussions with Mr. Stibb and others. So I shall leave the room for that item. Thanks.
Thank you. Just to say, I've had a communication from the developers about new road triangle, which was a glossy leaflet, which was kind of 4 sides, which I imagine went. I don't know, but I presume it went to all of the councillors here. Yes, I can just see people nodding. That's great. So I don't know if there's anybody else wishes to declare anything. Councillor Tony Lukey.
Yeah, I've visited the site and I spoke to residents for item 5 and item 6. I was on the planning committee at the time when we decided that, and I remember certain aspects of it. So that's my interest there.
Thank you. Thank you. Just to say, I visited the site on the Sunday. But I didn't actually speak to any residents. I think they were all out enjoying themselves. So just so you know that we have visited the site, and I presume lots of people have as well. Yeah, I can see some nods there. Okay, so there's nothing else to declare on that. Okay, so that's good news. Now we have to go back to take 2 lots of minutes of meetings. So I'm going to rely on those members who were members of those planning committees. Well, first of all, take the minutes of the meeting held on the 31st of March. I'm just going to say, is there any corrections that needed to be made? Can't see anybody signalling. Okay. Is there any matters arising from those minutes? So I take those minutes, I hope, are approved. You've got some nods. Thank you very much. So I'll sign those later. Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of April. Exactly the same. Members of those who were on those committees, are those accurate? Councillor Lukey.
I wasn't on the committee. I wasn't a member of the committee at that meeting, but I did attend the whole committee and watched it and participated and made comments on it. On the application, one thing that's is not very clear from the minutes is that there weren't unlike tonight's meeting, the agenda wasn't paginated. There wasn't a list of objections and responses from officers. and that was raised at the time, but it appeared quite a haphazard and rushed agenda. So there were no details, there was no structure for comments and responses on objections. There's no pagination, and there were breaks in the IT broadcasting. Those of you who were part of the committee there were breaks in the IT broadcasting, including for the member who actually moved the proposal. So I really like that minuted, that it was not as incompletely as it's recorded here. These minutes, but I do see and I do note an improvement on this agenda, that there are pages and pages numbered, and there is some sort of indexation, and there's also a list of objections and responses. Unlike the last one, I really think the last meeting slipped into some bad practice. And I hope the officers writing the reports and those publishing them will improve during my year as a member of this committee, and I will be picking up on this. Don't you worry about it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tony Lukey. I did notice because I also watched the entire proceedings, and I did notice there was some IT issues that caused some considerable disruption. However, Wendy has taken a note of that. I'm sure we will put that in the minutes. And I know the officers have, in fact, picked up all of those issues already in discussions with me. So I think we've covered that. And I'm looking at Matthew. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, Chair.
And I will, in fact, ensure that this continues. Okay.
Look, I really don't want our officers' professionalism compromised. It appeared that way last meeting, and I don't want to see that again this year whilst I'm on the committee.
Well, I hope, Councillor Lukey, that under my chair it will not be happening again. Okay, thank you. Okay, so having done that and that's kind of covered matters arising as well. Is there anybody else wish to say anything on those minutes? No. Okay, so we'll take that. Are they approved? Agreed? As amended? Okay, thank you very much. I'll take that as well. Okay, moving on. Planning applications for decisions. What I'd just like to just remind people, I don't intend going around introducing everybody and you all speaking. Right? I just wish that when you do speak, when you're called to speak at any point, if you just introduce yourself for the very first time, that should be sufficient. But when we actually come to making the decision, I will be calling for a vote at the end of the meeting on those decisions. And then I will go round individually and ask you to say whether you're actually going to, what you intend, how you vote. So we make sure that we are very clear that that is being recorded. It's very difficult for Wendy to do all that in a rush. So we want to make sure this is absolutely clear and everybody will have a chance, okay, to say how they're voting. Okay. So just remember, use your mics as well, because once you use your mic, that allows our technical people to make sure they've got the cameras on the right people. Okay. So moving on to the planning applications for decision tonight, we're going to start with Triangle Site, New Road Feltom, or the New Road Triangle, as it's amended. There is 2 papers tonight. You have your planning papers, and then you would have received an addendum this morning? Yesterday, sorry. Your addendum yesterday, so you would have had time to read it. I'm sorry that there are no paper copies of that available. That's how unfortunate it is. So you're going to have to rely on your phones or your tops on that one. So hopefully you've all read those. So we're now going to move on now. Just to remind people, I'm going to ask Shane Baker to introduce this, a brief overview. Then we'll be taking the objectors who have 5 minutes. Then there'll be questions from the members, and then we'll move on to the developers, 5 minutes with questions from the members, and then we will go to the planning officer, who will present the report. There will then be questions from members, and then finally there will be discussion from the members. And then there will be, as long as somebody moves something, we'll then have a vote. So that's how we plan to proceed, okay? So over to Shane.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Shane Baker. I'm the Head of Strategic Development and Delivery, a Planning Officer, and I'm the Case Officer for this item. In summary, the proposal is to redevelop the site. It's a council-owned property, ultimately. The proposal is for 176 new homes. 50.3% of those would be affordable. So there's 84 social rented units. There's also associated car parking and landscaping. There's 2 blocks. One is 11 stories and the other is 14 stories. Officers consider that the new homes, the landscaping and the overall design is acceptable. There would be a good quality accommodation provided. The site is suited for higher density development, given it's very close to Feltom Station. It adjoins the town centre. And in fact, it has now been identified in our local plan review as a housing site, and it's allocated for new housing in the local plan, which has been submitted to the Secretary of State. Overall, we consider that the benefits of this scheme through delivering housing, especially affordable housing, regenerating a prominent site on the approach to the town centre, and improvements to the public realm would outweigh any of the harmful effects. There are some matters which need addressing through conditions, and there are also some sort of residual impacts in respect of daylight and sunlight, but overall, on balance, we consider the application is acceptable and have recommended approval subject to the conditions and the planning obligations in the report and the addendum.
Thank you, Shane. Okay, so we'll hand over now to the objectors. I've got Daniel Marriott and Richard Clark. I'm not sure how you're going to, however you're going to split that up. There is 5 minutes. Sorry? Oh, 4 and 1, I've been discovered. Right, fine. So 4 minutes. 30 seconds before the end, you'll be warned. Okay, timekeeper here will tell us, just so you know how to wrap up. Okay. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that myself and many others in the area are not against the development of this site in principle. Hounslow needs housing, and this site will be a great place for people to live one day. Nonetheless, the sheer scale of the proposal in its current form is concerning and excessive. There are numerous direct contradictions in this proposal with multiple local plans, mostly concerning height. In addition to not complying with established development principles, the proposal ignores recent planning and development decisions in the immediate area. For clarity, there is currently no building in Feltom of the proposed elevation of 14 stories and no precedent for such height in the town. 12 stories is the current pinnacle, and any building higher than this will unquestionably dominate the skyline. Additionally, the proposal is 2 stories higher than the 12-story maximum height designation for a landmark at this site in the Feltom Master Plan. But even the prospect of a 12-story building disregards recent planning decisions, namely that the Show People site on Station Estate Road is no longer earmarked for redevelopment. This has vastly curtailed the scale of the originally anticipated Station Quarter project, which the proposal cites as justification for a landmark. Furthermore, the planning officer's report claims that the proposal has satisfactorily considered sensitive neighbouring development. It's hard to understand this conclusion. The proposed height and scale is by definition not complementary to the current and future realities of the site's surroundings. The proposal would lead to an 11 and 14-story development placed immediately next to the Show People whose homes are almost all single-story dwellings. Even where the proposed development drops down to 8 stories, this contrast with single-story dwellings completely ignores the Hounslow local plan and Feltom Master Plan's principle to moderate abrupt scale. To moderate abrupt scale differences between low buildings and taller development. The master plan recommends this be achieved through development of 4 to 5 stories. Similarly, the Hounslow site allocations document reaffirms that heights in the area should conform to the master plan. And the planning officer's report itself reiterates that the master plan's suggested building height for this site is 5 to 6 stories, with potential for taller focal elements. The proposal ignores much, if not all, of the proposed general heights conventions within the master plan. The London plan similarly decrees that there should be an appropriate transition in scale where sites adjoin significantly lower developments and park space. How this is achieved between single-storey developments and heights of 8, 11 and 14 stories is unexplained. The proposal is not even to scale with the new Feltom 355 development just on the left of the screen. 355 represents a better example of considerate planning, as although it rises to 10 stories at New Road, it drops to 6 and 7 stories along the riverside, and to 4 stories where it meets 3-storey terrace on Bedfont Lane. Conversely, the triangle plans propose an opposite aesthetic of 11 stories on the New Road block and 14 stories on the Riverside block. This creates an architectural mismatch with the Riverside block towering over the 355 Riverside sections. Of particular moral concern for me is that a development of this height and scale next to a minority group feels intimidating and unneighbourly at best, and tantamount to being walled in and ghettoised at worst. Conversely, the Fern Grove development on the right of the screen in the background has set a precedent for neighbourly development at 6 stories. It is in keeping with established principles to provide a more balanced scale of height. In conclusion, this site is evidently no longer suitable for a vast landmark, particularly not one so monolithic on top of parkland and the riverside, and in stark contrast to single-storey dwellings. At most, the triangle should mirror the scale and aesthetic of 355 and Fern Grove, with a taller social housing block on the New Road at 10 stories.
30 seconds, Speaker.
And a lower riverside block circa 6 stories overlooking the parkland. Given that this proposal is for 176 homes, I believe that the minimum of 110 homes proposed for the site by the council can still be met with curtailed heights, achieving a balance between the need for affordable housing and the impact of tall buildings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just give me a moment. Or whatever. Right, let's start. Hang on. Wait till he's ready. Right. You'll be timed from when you start, okay?
Thank you, councillors. You have the opportunity tonight to prevent a permanent scar on the Feltham landscape, one that is not in the scope of the current local plan and exceeds the scales proposed in the future plan by 50%. I'm presenting tonight a petition in solidarity with the show people who will be significantly affected by this. Over 700 people have signed this now and asking for the council to think again. This is your chance to listen. The speed at which this has gone to planning is unparalleled. I know people have waited 6 months for a decision for a house extension, yet this has been rushed through in barely 2. Why is that? But simply, there are a number of issues. Excessive height, which will impact important views, including heritage protected views of St Catherine's Spire, impact on the river corridor, loss of character, biodiversity, degradation of the green grid, which is not mentioned anywhere in any reports, which is important London plan principle, and potential wind tunnel effects, which have not been adequately dealt with. There are inaccuracies all over this application. The description of creating a new cycle path, which already exists, and there are also issues with the relationship with the existing path and the coherence with the existing parks master plan, which has which isn't coherent around the entrance area. Clearly, this has been rushed, and today is your opportunity to reject it in its current form.
Time. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Now, we're going to ask councillors to ask questions. So I'm just looking round. Councillor John Todd, did I see a hand? Not at the moment. Okay, thank you. I'm just quickly going round. Questions? Okay, Councillor Tony Lukey.
Thank you for that presentation. Can you just remind us what your preferred maximum height would be for any development on this site, and what, in your opinion, is missing here? What is here? What is being proposed here, but also what is missing here in terms of a development on this site? Whether it's adherence to the current local plan, the proposed local plan. Just remind us on that, please, gentlemen.
Shall I go first, and then you? Yeah, I mean, I would say we were expecting that there would be a development on this site. There has been a process of the Feltham master plan and the local plan, which has been developed over the past 5 years. Many of us have contributed to it. my expectation would be that the size of this building on this site, which would be appropriate, would be about half of this size. I mean, maybe to 2/3 of this size. That was what was being anticipated. That was the scope within the local plan, which is 50% higher than what is in the local plan, as admittedly a minimum, but that was the guiding principle. I mean, one other thing to mention, that the Feltom master plan sets out a guiding principle for this area. But in the Feltom master plan, it explains that the show people site would no longer be included and that there would be a council strategy for that area. As far as I am aware, there has been no council strategy for that area. So there is a gap missing. There is no way that you can approve this today based on an incoherent planning policy. It just simply is excessive, and it makes no sense. I mean, Daniel's made the point as well. I don't know if you want to say anything to add.
I think I'm coming at it quite similarly to Mr. Clark. I think I would like to see a development that adheres to the development principles in the documents that I outlined. So first and foremost, if we're looking at the very maximum that was kind of outlined within the Feltom Master Plan, that was 12 stories. This is already 2 stories over that, and that was a maybe. Now, the general designation for this site was 5 and 6 stories. So that, I mean, I'm also coming at it from a sense of what precedent we have in the area. So I live in Feltom 355. I'm a very new resident in Hounslow. I lived in the borough of Newham for 8 years. But I think Feltom 355 has set a precedent, and it's set a precedent for respective development in the area. So I would like to see something that at a maximum would mirror that. So a taller block on the new road, which is the social housing block, at a maximum of 10 stories. So that's only 1 story less than what is being proposed here. For me, the major concern is the Riverside block, because it's 14 stories, it's monolithic, it completely dominates the skyline, and it flies in the face of all of the development principles for parkland, the Riverside, and the show people that in the documents that I've outlined today.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor John Todd?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good evening. Have you met with the developers and or the council and discussed your views and objections?
So this was first presented a couple of months ago, and I tried to raise it at the local area forum, and I was told that the council didn't have anything to do with it, and I tried, Wendy tried very gallantly to try and get the information about what information that the council had about this. A few weeks later, there was this leaflet which was put through people's doors, which proudly said that for the past 2 years, the developer has been speaking to the council about this, and completely incoherent to what had been told to the area forum. There was then a consultation meeting via Zoom, which was held. Now, there was the opportunity to ask questions, and points were put across, but then the application was submitted so soon afterwards that I don't believe any of the points were seriously taken on board. Some of the points which came across afterwards were almost laughable, in that they were kind of trying to claim that that this was high quality design inspired by Feltom's industrial heritage. Well, it looks more like Manhattan than Feltom's industrial heritage. Anyone who knows Feltom's industrial heritage will know that most of these occurred in hangars, which were buildings which came up to an apex. Actually, some of the designs around Aston Martin were some of the most beautiful curves that you'll ever see. And to claim that it's somehow an amazing design when actually it's a monolithic slab is not coherent, and I think the design review panel comments make that point as well. So I've had a chance to input. Do I feel like they were heard? No, absolutely not. And was there any attempt to change it? There was simply not enough time, and this has been rushed through. Do you have?
Can I just pick up on that point? Yeah. what you were told about the development whenever you had your meeting, Zoom or otherwise, was that the final design we now see tonight?
As far as I can tell, it is. I would be interested if there were any changes, but there would. There was very little time, and certainly the principle of 11 stories and 14 stories has not changed, even though we objected to it then.
I haven't had any contact with the developers. I know that this has been through several consultative stages, which Mr. Clark just described. The development first came to my concern a few months ago when I got a letter through the door from the planning office. Thank you. From the planning office. Thank you. As a resident, just telling me this was going to, this planning application had been formally submitted. Do I want to register any objections or notes? At that time, I wrote to the planning office with an objection letter. Who I have been in touch with are the Hounslow Park authorities for two reasons. I don't know if you're able to get a map of the proposed development on the screen. For me to just highlight this point. That one, yeah. So at the bottom of the site, you can see there's a courtyard. And the proposal is that the entrance to the site will be on a diagonal on that corner. But what the park people have actually done as part of the arena's master plan is they put a chicane in on that path on the entrance to the park. So it doesn't appear on that plan. So I have been liaising with the park authorities to try and work out if there has been any kind of communication between the developers and the park, because that isn't clear on that map. The other thing that I am not clear on is at the moment, so if that's looking north up. So to the east of the path on the west of the site, there are 3 lampposts, which I assume are council property. Now this proposal is for development right up to the path. It doesn't really make sense to me why those lamps would be there if that was part of that site and not part of the parkland. I also haven't seen any kind of explanation for whether they will be replaced or what mitigations there will be for lack of light.
Thank you very much.
All right, doesn't appear to be any other questions for the objector, so thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
And now, once you've, that's fine. Okay, so over to the developers. You have 5 minutes. I'm aware, Kate, that's Katie, isn't it? Katie Davis. Okay, you have 5 minutes. You'll be warned 30 seconds before the end. Okay, so when you're ready to start, you'll be timed from that.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. My name is Katie Davis, and I'm speaking on behalf of the joint applicants Lambton 360 and EcoWorld. I'm joined by Jeremy Stibby of Lambton 360, who can assist with any questions. EcoWorld are unable to attend due to restrictions on numbers. I would firstly like to provide a bit of background with regards to the planning status of the site and how we got to where we are today, and then highlight the benefits of the proposal before you and just how important this scheme is for Feltom and for Hounslow. As the report sets out, the site is shown as local open space in your adopted local plan. However, it serves no function as open space and hasn't done since it was last used as allotments in the 90s. It has not been accessible to the public since then, has been fenced off, neglected, and more recently has been used as temporary car parking and for construction storage. With the emphasis being on improving the neighbouring parkland, this small triangle has been deemed surplus to requirements in the 2018 open space study. The land was first identified by your officers through a visionary exercise in 2015 that formed the basis of the GLA designation as a housing zone in 2016. The site was included within the Feltom Master Plan, which was consulted upon in 2017 and then identified as a housing allocation in both versions of the Local Plan Review published in 2017 and 2019. It is noted that only 2 site-specific comments from the public were received during this process. The site also sits in an opportunity area and is in a highly sustainable location, immediately adjacent to the town centre and opposite Feltom train station. This is exactly the sort of site where policy at all levels promotes residential-led regeneration. In terms of the applicant's involvement, the team has engaged with your officers through the PPA process since 2018. The scheme has evolved significantly in light of feedback from planning, design and highways officers and has been presented to your design review panel twice. In terms of the local community, we held an online meeting with residents of Station Estate Road, had a dedicated consultation website, and held a virtual consultation with leaflets being distributed to 5,000 addresses in advance. The benefits that would flow from the scheme are substantial. 176 new homes, 84 of these, 48% by number and 50% by HAB room, will be affordable at social council rent levels, with the remainder retained by Lambton Investment. This quantum is significant and accords with genuine housing need as set out in your corporate plan. Sustainability. The scheme achieves a 70% carbon reduction on site through the incorporation of energy-efficient design, air source heat pumps and PV panels. It is essentially car-free with policy cycle spaces. The scheme fully embraces your green recovery strategy. High-quality design. The design review panel said it was an exemplar of how to progress a complicated project. The buildings step up in height from 8 stories at the eastern and northern ends, positioned away from Station Estate Road. The supporting documents relating to wind, daylight, sunlight, townscape and aviation confirm the suitability of the scheme in this location. Improved connectivity and security. One of the key messages raised by residents of Station Estate Road was security. The design team has engaged with the Met Police with significant attention paying to the boundary treatment of the site. We are proposing to widen the footpath along the river with front doors to the ground floor homes proposed along this boundary, adding surveillance, life and activity. Increased biodiversity. 43 new trees will be planted with a 50% net increase in biodiversity achieved on site. The scheme does not impact the adjacent sink. And overall contribution to the local community. The construction of the scheme would generate jobs and training and employment opportunities for local people.
30 seconds, Speaker.
The scheme generates SIL receipts through major infrastructure, but also to local projects through your Thriving Communities Fund. In summary, the application proposes an exemplar scheme in more ways than one. If you resolve to grant permission tonight, the 176 homes, including 84 at social council rent levels, would be delivered ready to move in by 2024. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so over now to members for questions, please. Right, Councillor Alan Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, who can I see there? Oh, there's Jeremy and is it Kate? Yeah,
Katie,
hello.
yes, thank you.
Katie, sorry, good evening. I know not all members have got the addendum, but I read page 3, the Hounslow officer's response in the addendum. Secure by design, condition 24, they mention these providing an opportunity to refine their height and appearance as appropriate. Now, given what we've heard from Richard and, sorry, I forgot your name, Daniel, this evening, and the neighbouring block, Fairview, is 10 stories. What is the scope of that in terms of viability? Because I know viability has been an issue, but to quote that from the officer's response, there's the opportunity to refine their height and appearance as appropriate. What exactly does that mean? Or was that one for you?
Well, we can look at height in two matters. You've raised it specifically in reference to viability, but we can look at it from a design point of view as well. So I can pass over to Jeremy, who can deal with that. And if anybody else has a question.
It's the scope for refine that I'm interested in. Yeah.
Okay, well, just to say, I mean, we spent a long time looking at the heights and brought them down at various points and brought them away from impact as much as we could. We have obviously put in a viability assessment, which is with the planning application, which shows that the hurdle for development in terms of development margin is lower than it would normally be expected for this type of development. So it already has a viability stretch, given that we're doing a whole range of things, including the sustainability, the level of social rented housing, etc. So we did look at the viability assessment in terms of what the impact might be of taking 2 stories off the 14-story block, which would lose 12 homes. And that is a significant impact, and it reduces the level of development margin to a point that it's not viable to deliver this scheme as submitted. And also any delay that was needed to review the project in light of what those changes would need to be made to make it viable, be it a loss in the social rented homes or less sustainability or whatever it might be, would put the grant that's being given by the GLA to the scheme at risk, because that's time limited, which, as the viability assessment in the planning application says, would bring the social rented homes down to single digits. So we believe we've worked really hard to get to a scheme that delivers something viable with minimal impact insofar as we're delivering the scheme in line with the various strategies that we've worked with. We've consulted, we did respond extensively to the points raised in the consultation, particularly around increasing social housing and sustainability. And it wouldn't be viable. So we'd delay it, and we'd see a loss of social rented homes is what I believe.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, maybe that may get a response when the officers respond as well, because it comes from their part of the addendum. I've got a couple of other points. Can I put them now? Thank you. On page 21, we talk about the natural environment once the development is complete. And I quote, details of works to retained trees. This is retained trees, and measures for their construction to ensure their survival and health would be recommended, you say. Could you do more than recommend? Could you show an absolute commitment to that and agree to a condition, maybe along some of those lines?
Yes, well, just to clarify, firstly, there's existing hedging, shrubbery, and some trees across the site, but there's also trees outside of the boundary. Yeah. So just to clarify, there's a large plane tree at the northeastern end, adjacent to the property that's at the entrance of Station Estate Road. That remains in place. That is not to be removed. That has to be protected. Any others along the boundary, etc., the majority of those within the site are proposed to be removed. We've obviously looked at the life and health of them as trees. And so, yes, there is some existing shrubbery and trees that will be removed, but we are planting 43 in their place. And yes, I believe there is a condition that relates to soft and hard landscaping that would secure not only the retention of trees, also in terms of the hoarding that needs to be erected around the site to protect the root protection areas of the trees, but also to secure that those new trees are planted. There's also, in terms of new trees along the street scene, there's new trees that have gone in outside the Feltom 355 scheme. The idea is to do something very, very similar and have trees along the front of New Road as well.
Absolutely. We'd absolutely insist on that, I believe. Just a couple more, Chair, brief ones. One of the problems in Feltom is the perception of we have too many tower blocks going up. When you actually look at it, it is perhaps not as great as some people determine, but we do need those homes. We do need affordable homes, and this project does offer a lot of socially rented, let's call them council homes. But I think somewhere down the line, we're going to have to look at this and say, when it comes to the MOD site or other parts of Feltham, that developers need to think about mixed tenure and family homes as well.
I'm
And that-
sorry, Councillor
Sorry, is that-
Mitchell,
I might come off?
you've gone off into something
Okay.
complete. Could you just ask
Yes,
direct
yes.
questions of this
Yes, I
development?
will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask one more. Even though this is a non-parking scheme, and we have another block in Franktown Court round the corner, it is inevitable there will be some vehicle ownership coming along. And it is a concern of residents in the non-CPZ areas of what the knock-on effect of this will be. Now, I've had discussions with the Deputy Chief Executive of the Council and said, well, would developers join us in a parley or a discussion with Town Centre Management Feltom and the Council as to the unused spaces that we have in the town centre in the multi-storey car park, even though the Council and the Town Centre Management are opponents, if you like, or competitors for that, because it strikes me as insane that we have upward of 100, 150 parking spaces a day that are just vacant, 60 of them outside the travel lodge, that it can't be beyond, you know, the imagination of mankind to do something about that, something that benefits the residents. And I did ask that of the Fairview developers a few years ago, and they agreed to that. So I just wonder whether you'd agree, should the time come, to put your support into that discussion, please.
Thank you, Councillor. There's a push and pull when it comes to parking.
Absolutely.
It's very much we're trying to plan for the future.
Yeah, this isn't an attempt to encourage car ownership. It's just trying to get
The inevitability
Yeah.
if there is. Well, in terms of the scheme as it stands, the car spaces that we do have are for disabled access. If there's a requirement for more of those, the 7 provided at the start, should there be a requirement for more, there is the space to provide an additional 11. So that would be 10% overall of the whole scheme. But they would be for accessible spaces. If there's any requirement for parking elsewhere, at the moment, New Road you can't park on, obviously. There are wider areas where there's CPZs. There is money, as I understand, from other schemes that have been approved, Section 106 money, to consult and indeed implement on CPZs in the areas that don't currently have them. Of course, they're subject to consultation by the residents. I think talking about a future strategy of the town, I actually don't think that's site-specific to this scheme.
No,
it would need to be a
isn't, but-
wider discussion with the council.
Yes.
I think probably maybe a question to, I know the highways
Yeah.
officer is
But would you in
here.
principle join in with that? Should it occur? Should it come along?
Yes, we would. I mean, this will be a development which will be owned in partnership between Lambton as part of the council and the council, and so within the constraints of what's appropriate, we seek to actively manage this so it's successful for the people who live here, but also the people who live in the surrounding area.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor John Todd.
That's very kind. Good evening. I read today that the GLA mayor has said that this plan does not comply with the London plan. Would you like to comment?
I assume you're referring to the stage 1 reports in the addendum, the summary.
Not at all.
It's been on the GLA website as well.
Can I clarify? There's a website called Concilio which publicises all the applications throughout London, and it said that this and others not in the borough. So I'm giving you the opportunity to respond and explain why you're not compliant.
Thank you. All major schemes, so over 150 units or of a certain height, get referred to the GLA. And there's 2 stages for that. And at stage 1, it's quite common for a response to be received that says it's non-compliance with some of the strategic issues in the London plan. The opportunity is then to feed back to the GLA at part stage 2, which is post-committee. So we will be responding to the GLA as part of that. I mean, I can break it down into some of the points that they've raised, if that would help. Excuse me whilst I just pull up the addendum report. So the GLA obviously agree with the principle of the land use and principle of the scheme in terms of the housing, the social housing, obviously that's strongly supported. In terms of urban design, they've raised some comments about the finessing of the massing and in terms of the facade treatment, and they also make reference to gated, in italics, gated development. So those comments have been raised and we've directed them already to where all that information is contained within our design and access statement. We went through a significant options appraisal with this. And by that, I mean about a year and a half where we looked at countless number of options about how to design the scheme. We had three
Sorry,
different
can I
blocks.
interrupt you? I think you're going off tangent a bit. I'm a layman. You get a letter from the GLA saying it doesn't comply. So what are you going to do to make sure it does comply?
So we need to respond to the GLA to set out where that information is contained within the planning application. So partly it's about providing additional justification, or it's about securing conditions that then make something acceptable. So for example, they've mentioned then on the transport one, they've talked about a delivery and service plan, and that's one of the conditions that proposed. And that would then satisfy
You've been very
the
helpful.
GLA.
Can I stick to the building and the construction? You used the word I've never heard before. Was it finishing?
Facade.
Okay, facade. Okay, I didn't hear
Brickwork.
that. So are they saying you've got to make it smaller?
No, I don't believe they're talking about the overall height and mass. What they're talking about is, have we looked at all of the options of the scheme, of the site? And yes, we have. We've been through a very, very detailed process. I think that the GLA we did meet with before the application was submitted. They don't necessarily digest all the information at this stage, but they do have to by stage 2. So we will direct them to that information at stage 2.
Okay, that's very helpful. Can I move on? Do you have a copy of the planning report? Okay. You mentioned sunlight. And if you look at page 20, second box up from the bottom, it says a daylight and sunlight report demonstrates effects from overshadowing would generally meet BRE guidance, which means that some don't. You didn't mention that in your presentation. You said that complied, but I don't want to misquote you, but you certainly didn't highlight the fact there are issues. And going further through the report, the schedules elsewhere show various levels of inadequate sunlight. Would you like to comment on that? Is there a correlation between height and a lack of sunlight?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so the report details our daylight sunlight report, and I will also add it mentions overshadowing of gardens as well, when it talks about overshadowing of amenity spaces, and I think that's an important point as well. That's at 8.161. Apologies, mine doesn't have page numbers on it. In terms of overall compliance, we have to look at things on balance. Yes, there are some divergences, and by that, what we've done is a very worst case scenario looking at this assessment. In relation to Station Estate Road, there are a lot of properties there which are of a temporary basis. There are a few mobile homes, and I will use an example in one of the tables that you've referred to on that first page. It says there's 32 windows in one of those properties. I think you can probably imagine that there aren't normally 32 windows in a house. If you imagine that's therefore counting the mobile homes that are in the garden. Now, they may move, they may not be parked in that location, they may not have anyone living in them, but we have assessed all of those windows as a worst case scenario should somebody be inhabiting that space. So in terms of any transgressions or discrepancies against the BRE, so lower standards, yes, it spells out where they are, but I think on balance, you have to look at it in the round. We generally comply with the BRE because as an overall proportion, it's only a few.
With respect, I think that last statement's a contradiction. You either comply or you don't. The top of page 59 says, I don't want to misquote it, but the daylight to sunlight would be noticeably reduced. And noticeably is quite a strong word. And I'll close my question on this section by asking you to look at paragraph 8163. There's a quote from the Mayor's Housing SPG. And I think it says words to the effect that the guidelines need to be applied sensitively to higher density developments. I always think there's a danger in these that because you're building for the common good, alleged community, the benefits, you impose unfair conditions on those who are going to occupy it. So I'm giving the opportunity to respond to that.
Thank you. Yeah, understand. And just to follow on from actually your previous point, which I didn't respond to, the relationship between height and daylight sunlight. what we've looked at here is an overall assessment of the site. If you imagine there's nothing there on the site at the moment, it's actually quite an unusual environment. If there was a building there at the moment, the light received by its neighbours would actually be more reduced than it is at the moment. They actually receive more light than is usual in an urban area. Then when you apply the planning policy, which sets out at both the national level in the NPPF, the London plan level with policy you quoted here in the Mayor's SPG, and also in your own local plan, it does talk about flexibility in high density urban locations, and that yes, to look at the public benefits that outweigh that. What's really important is when we met with residents of Station Estate Road, there was a concern about their gardens, and the time spent during the pandemic in open spaces, at 8.161, it demonstrates that all the gardens, it still meets the test in terms of overshadowing of the gardens. So I think that's very important to look at the different elements, whether it's daylight, sunlight, the fact that we've looked at mobile homes as well as permanent constructions, the gardens as well, pulled the buildings away from those, however the distance from Fairview scheme as well, 27 metres across the river. On balance, we weigh all those up, and the conclusion has been drawn by not only our consultants, but your officers that we comply.
One more. You heard the objectors talking about the structure of the developers. So I'm aware it's Lambton 360. It's a partnership between a company owned by Hounslow Council, wholly owned, and EcoWorld. It put simply, the land is the council's land, as I understand it, and it was passed to Lambton for development. Now, when you come to assess the viability, did you apply common standards? What I'm trying to say is, has this partnership denied more social housing? So we own the site, we ask you to develop it, and we're going to now go on, I presume, sell them commercially. Would you like to comment on that statement?
Yeah, let me comment on that. So the site was part of a programme commissioned to Lambton through a joint venture with EcoWorld, and the idea was that it would deliver a number of things for the council. One would be an amount of affordable housing, and one would be a surplus returned to the council for use by the council. And that original deal was on the basis of 40% affordable housing on any site developed, and that was 60% of that 40% was going to be social, London affordable rent, and 40% was going to be shared ownership. And then the surplus generated from the private homes would then be shared half and half between the council and EcoWorld. That was the deal. What we've got here is something that's moved quite considerably to benefit of the council by quite a lot of hard work. And that is, we've now got 50% affordable housing, but it's not just affordable housing, it's going to be council housing at social rent. So it's all social rent now. And that's one of the things we responded to in consultation, because when we started the consultation, which has been described back in at the end of last year, there was shared ownership in there, but we changed that to council owned social rent. So we're doing that. We're also, whilst this is not a planning matter, the 92 private homes will be bought and owned by Lambton and used at rents which enable people who can't access social housing but need housing, and these will be local people as well. So we're doing that too. There's also a surplus, and that surplus will be shared in the right format. So we think we've moved some way from when the site was originally commissioned and contracted to deliver a better outcome.
I really appreciate your answers. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Vikram Gurul.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to everyone that's contributed to the debate so far. So it's a case, Jeremy, to the people that are objecting as well. So this is quite an exciting project or interesting project in an area that has quite high buildings already. I'm thinking about St. Giles Hotel and others nearby. So it's an interesting proposition. One thing I'm particularly very pleased about is the percentage of affordable homes. So we have 84 units there. We currently have a waiting list of over 3,000 families on the waiting.
Excuse me, Councillor.
So a question.
Question, please.
Yeah. So sorry. So I was just saying the question I had particularly is on page 18 of our agenda 5.5, where It has Block A has 98 homes with social rented units to the ground floor and market units above. Block B has 78 homes, all being socially rented. What is the thought process behind Block B being all fully socially rented without proportioning across both high-rise buildings or what have you? So just want to ask that.
It was a joint project decision between us and Hounslow, who've been part of the development of this with us, because of course they're taking one of the blocks. It makes sense in terms of ownership, but I think one thing that's important to say is that it's been designed very much around an inclusive and democratic block. So there's access across both blocks through the courtyard to enable it to be one community. In fact, there are social rented homes in the market block at the lower level, so that enables some mixing. It has this courtyard at the bottom. It has one access. It has one concierge, so they share the same concierge, and then all of the amenity space and cycle storage is all shared. So there's some hierarchy in the blocks as you go up them in relation to ownership, so that we can have a proper management service charge and all that sort of arrangement. But as far as we possibly can, we've made this one estate, one community, a democratic accessibility, so that we can have it without the problems that some developments have faced, where you've had apartheid, you might say.
No further questions, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Smith Chowdhury.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone who has contributed so far. Just a quick one. You've said you on the consultation before that you've sent out 5,000 letters, and when you did the online Zoom meeting, the Zoom consultation, do you know how many people participated, how many residents gave the feedback on that Zoom meeting? I might be missing something here after reading carefully.
I did know these figures off by heart, but I know we had, I think, 4 councillors in attendance, and I think we had about 8 members of the public. And then the rest of it was our project team who actually dialed onto it. I do believe then that representatives who attended from the public then relayed some of the information on a Facebook social media page. So I think the information was shared more widely for people who didn't actually log on to that consultation that night.
Right, so who didn't log on or couldn't log on. So you felt or you think that all the people who were maybe they were representing 8 people who attended, they were representing the whole Feltham North, basically.
We sent out leaflets to 5,000 addresses before then. There's been a website that's been live the whole time well before then, since November. And we also had a separate meeting with Station Estate Road. So I think in terms of overall, we reached out to a very wide area. But that was the attendance that night.
Thank you.
Councillor Tony Lukey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up again on the daylight stuff and the overshadowing, and it's not just the aspect on the station estate, the show people site, but it's also on that 355 Feltham 355 and other blocks where it says here on page 58 8.156 that 34% of the properties in Feltham 355 did not pass the daylight test and the sunlight test, and there's a whole number of others at 50% and below on the table above. So yeah, so if that's what's recorded here, how come you're quite confident here, and where it's and repeating what Councillor not wanted to repeat what Councillor Todd said, but later on at 8.157, daylight to some rooms will be notably reduced. And it's not just so how do we explain that is compatible? The other thing is you are developers, you're advisors to developers, you are familiar with the Hounslow local plan as it is now, and as it is submitted as a draft. So why still go way over the limits there? Why do you, without anybody wanting to tell me, because I just walked past the High Street Quarter today, when I remember the architect saying there will be an iconic development, without you telling me that this is going to be an iconic development, how can this really be a landmark development there in Feltom, particularly when it's so high? And with respect, I mean, we know Lipshut Stevenson, but they're that is still quite a bland cut price building, in my opinion. Answer those if you like, and we'll come back to viability in a minute.
Thank you, Councillor. To expand on the daylight point, and you're quite right, on the other side of the river, we've got the new Fairview scheme. We have the benefit with the Fairview scheme in that it's a recently approved scheme. We have all the layouts. We know exactly where it's a bathroom, if it's a bedroom, if it's a living space, if it's a habitable space, basically. So it's less guesswork than on Station Estate Road. We also are able to do another alternative test. So again, there's a site at the moment where there's no building on it. And the BRE guidance allows us to assume what's called a mirror image. So opposite the Fairview scheme, to assume if there were to be a building there, and we were to therefore have our scheme now come on there, what the difference there in the daylight levels is. And that then sends out lower down in terms of the alternative test. So we've got a few different types of tests with Feltom 355, which is why we've got what they call the no skyline assessment as well. And then you've got the mirror assessments. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. So what we've done is actually said, when you've referred to the 66% pass, actually on the other means of testing it, it's better. There is still a loss. And I think this is the point we're trying to make. We are being very upfront about the fact that there are some daylight impacts to neighbouring properties on both sides of the river. And that's where the planning balance comes in. Now, if we were to look at this site in a different way, and it goes back to a point Councillor Todd made, to have no impact, which planning policy doesn't say you need to do, but to have no impact in terms of daylight sunlight on any of those properties, we would only be able to build 6 stories on this site. And 6 stories would not achieve the urban regeneration and the number of homes that were required. So I think in terms of where we are with the heights, that's effectively the no impact. But planning policy doesn't talk about no impact, but that's the worst case scenario. You then raised a point about we're advisors obviously to schemes and the words landmark, and I'm very familiar with High Street Quarter. What we've gone through is a design-led process. So yes, there's the viability argument, but we also have to demonstrate that the tall buildings in this location have that design-led process behind it. A level of design scrutiny that's now in the London plan. Policy D4 talks about design scrutiny for tall buildings. This is defined as tall. Your definition is anything over 6. So we went through your design review panel. As I said, we looked at lots of different options. We had more of a tower building closer to the park at one point with a longer building along the frontage. We had 3 different buildings. We've looked at lots of different configurations across the site. What we've proposed is something that we believe is the optimal solution for the site, that is supported in design terms, is supported in all the technical assessments. So whether that be wind, daylight, sunlight overall, aviation, and is a scheme that then has all those benefits that flow from it. And that's the point about the planning balance that's weighed against any transgressions in relation to daylight.
Okay, thank you. And look, yeah, I looked at your viability report. It was written in March. It's suggesting a 10% profit there on the development there. But at the same time, this is ours. All right, this is This is land that belongs to London Borough of Hounslow, albeit it being neglected since the 90s. It didn't neglect itself, but it was decision makers that neglected it. So it's ours. Why can't we build, as it says, 8.18, the current Western Borough local plan site allocations, 110 homes? Why can't we do that instead of what's being proposed of 176 or 188? I can't remember. Anyway, many more.
176.
Okay, so what is the issue really? I mean, we get this with viability, because you're not going to build this. You're not going to build this tomorrow. So the sums that you've the sums that have been stated, the amounts of money that have been stated, won't be realised, say, until 2024. When we know that the price of property is rising, and it will be a lot more by then, and the land value will be a lot more than the £2.2 million that has been stated there in the viability plan. So why can't we go lower? And why is as often, and Councillor Todd will agree, as often these viabilities are occasionally a red herring, really, to say, yeah, well, we can't build any less. And I'll come back to that habitable rooms of affordable housing, as opposed to percentage number of units as well, because that seems, it's the first time I've come across that. I know it's concocted by officers or by developers, but I don't make it 50% affordable housing. I make, it's saying here 47%.
Okay, can I answer that? And sorry, Councillor Lucky, I'm trying to do this in the microphone, so I'm not avoiding your gaze. The first thing to say is, and it's a repeat of what I said earlier, is that there was a commission to deliver these sites in a particular way back in 2017 to Lambton, and then through a joint venture with EcoWorld, and that was to deliver a number of benefits, affordable housing, and then surplus from market. And we're of course delivering that, but we've enhanced it, and we're now delivering through the consultation we've had and through the commitment we've made as a partner to Hounslow, that all of the increased level of affordable housing will be council social rent, but also we're buying the market homes. So we'll use them in partnership with the council for local people, and any value growth will be captured in for the benefit of the council as the shareholder of Lambton and the owner of the council rented homes. So all of that value growth comes back. Just on a point of timing, we are intending to start this year. So the whole idea is we're getting ready now to procure a contractor to build below us as a joint venture partnership. We aim to start in the ground this year with a substantive contract start early in the new year to capture the grant. If we delayed that, we'd lose the grant, and if we lost the grant, the amount of social rented homes will go down dramatically. So we are intending to start straight away. The surplus is captured back to the council, and it's in this delivery route because it was commissioned that way 3 years ago, and I think that's not, that's a past decision. Hopefully that answers the point.
Do you want me to mention the point about HAB rooms?
Well, you could do, but I mean, the reason I think it's an excuse rather than a decision, isn't it? Really, to use a four-year-old calculation for something that's going to be realised 6 years after that. But anyway, yeah, go on. Habitable rooms, Katie.
It's London Plan policy. So the policy in the GLA's SPG and in the new London Plan published in March very much talks about habitable rooms and doing affordable housing calculations by habitable rooms. We've presented it in both forms. I'm aware that your adopted policy is in terms of unit numbers. Your corporate pledge is all about unit numbers. But this is a referable scheme to the GLA, so we do have to set it out in their terminology as well.
Okay, Councillor Luque, have you got any more questions? And can you, yeah? Thank you. That's brilliant. So thank you very much indeed. I'd like to sit down. That's lovely. Thank you. Okay, passing over now to Shane Baker to go through the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate, the scheme is for 176 homes. We can see the site on the first slide. It's a disused site. It was, I believe, once used as allotments, became disused some time ago. It has had a number of permissions for temporary use. So at the moment, there's sort of a hard surfacing. It was used for car parking, associated with some related construction work, and also for the nearby supermarket. You can see the position of the site on New Road. Obviously, the blue line there is the Longford River, which is a site of nature conservation importance. Feltom 355, the new development, which we've been hearing about a couple of times, is a new scheme which is 4 to 10 stories. Then you have Feltom Station. You have the new work to the approach to the station with new pedestrian overbridge over the railway. We have Lidl, which is a single-story supermarket building directly to the south. And then, of course, along the northern boundary, along New Road and then Station Estate Road, we have the community of travelling show people. As again, we've heard, there's a number of homes there. There's also yards for storage of fairground equipment, machinery, rides, and also mobile homes. And then to the northwest, you have large areas of open space. You have the Glebelands playing fields and Feltom Arena. The boundary of the town centre is along New Road, and then beyond the railway lines to the south, you have Feltom Town Centre itself. Some large-scale buildings there, and then to the southeast you have conservation area where there's a number of listed buildings, some locally listed buildings, one of which includes the Feltom Station building. Just some images of the site and the surrounds. So on the left you've got New Road, and on the left-hand side of the image of the road is the site. So there's currently some hoarding, some hedging, and so on. On the right-hand side, you can see the hard surfacing that was put in temporarily. Beyond that is the Station Estate Road housing that we've been talking about. And this is just showing New Road and the context of some of the new development which has emerged around the station, Feltom Station. So you have the new crossing, which leads into the footbridge over the railway, and the new brick building is Feltom 355. In the background, you can make out the St. Giles Hotel, and on the right-hand image is New Road opposite the site. It's quite a poor street scene. You've got the blank wall of the Lidl supermarket. Just some further images of those properties. Again, the new scheme, up to 10-story. I'll move on to the next one. This one, you can see the little car park. It's the other end of New Road. There's the large tree, which is in the centre of the photo on the left, and then to the left of the other photo is one of the trees which is to be retained, which we've been talking about. Then you can see some of the properties on New Road and Station Estate Road which border the site. They're generally 1 to 2-story. This is a view from within Station Estate Road, looking in the direction of the site. In the background, you can make out the Feltom 355 development. A view overlooking some of Station Estate Road, and then another view on the right-hand side of the predominant form of housing on Station Estate, which is low-rise. Next one, the area is very close to Glebelands playing fields. We do have the Feltom Parks Master Plan, which is currently being implemented. And that's a scheme to upgrade, enhance the access and security throughout the parklands and make them much more accessible, and creating new routes and improving the accesses throughout. On the left-hand side, you've got the pathways that runs alongside the western side of the site. And in the center of the background, you can make out St. Catherine's church spire, which is a grade 2 listed structure, listed building. And just to the right of that, you can make out the Feltom 355 again. Just approaching the site, you've got some of the existing hedging which adjoins the pathway, which runs alongside the western boundary of the site. And then there's just another shot on the right-hand side of that, which is just some of the development on Station Estate Road. To the north of the Show People site, there's some new development which is emerging. We have an image here of 21 Fern Grove, which is a scheme which is more or less, this first block is nearing completion. And it's showing that alongside the path, we're getting more active uses and introducing more residential use. Moving on to the scheme itself, just to repeat, there's 176 homes. It's a wholly residential scheme. 84 of those would be for social rent. There's 18 wheelchair units spread throughout each block. So there'll be 9 in the market housing and 9 in the affordable housing. We have effectively a car-free scheme. There's only the blue badge parking. There's 7 spaces provided along perpendicular to the rear boundary, access from a new road. There is provision for a further 11 blue badge spaces within the site should the need arise. But in the meanwhile, that space would be laid out and potentially could be used for extra amenity space. You can see the layout of the 2 blocks. One's parallel to New Road. That's 8 to 11 stories. And then the other block runs alongside the Longford River and the pathway to the parkland. And that is 8 to 14 stories. They're separated in the sort of the corner of the triangle by a communal amenity and entrance area. It's proven to be the sort of most the optimal location for that sort of amenity space because it has the southerly aspect. There was consideration about putting it behind the buildings in the interior of the site, but given that that's where the vehicle turning head and that's where the parking is, and there's also a less favourable aspect because it's overshadowed by the 2 blocks themselves. It wasn't provided there. And then in the sort of northwest corner, you have another area of amenity space, which is the children's play area for under 5s. These aren't that clear, but there's some elevations of each of the blocks. As we've heard, they are tall buildings as defined in our local plan. And obviously, just looking at them, they are tall buildings. Each end of the block as it approaches the boundaries with the more sensitive uses, it does moderate in height. So there's a step down in height to 8 stories. And the ends of each block also tapers into a chamfer, again, just to try and reduce the mass and the impact on neighbours. You're looking at just a visual showing the materials and the elevations. And each building would be of brick construction. You've got, obviously, each property has a balcony for private amenity space. The design is as a pair of buildings. You can see that the coloration and the tone of the bricks reverses between the two to avoid appearing too monolithic and trying to break them up some more. This is a view from within the nearby open space alongside the Longford River, where there's a footpath. And you can see that this is a key view which is retained of the St. Catherine's spire, the new building, along with the Feltom 355 building, effectively frames that view. with the spire terminating that vista. Just a little bit more information and detail about the materials. You're looking at brick buildings with some metal detail, the window frames, sort of bronzed, anodized metal. Around the perimeter of the site, you've got some brick wall enclosures which are perforated, so there's openings within them where they adjoin the ground floor units. They are lower, and in the top sort of right-hand corner, that's an image of the rear parking area, and the idea is that the surface would be grasscrete, which has the benefit of being permeable, but also may add some greenery. Another image of the layout. So you've got that central parking and turning area. So all servicing would take place within the site. That includes the refuse vehicles. This also provides for emergency vehicle access. And then you've got the access to the disabled parking spaces. The green areas are the cycle stores, the secure cycle stores. So there's 314 secure cycle spaces within the scheme. Just in respect of the aspect, there's 97 dual aspect units and there's 70 single aspect units. Of the single aspect, many of those would be facing either sort of east or west, where you would have a good outlook and good access to daylight. There are 17 single aspect north facing units. That's just a view of the upper floor. Here's a layout of one of the 3-bedroom units. So there's 24 3-bedroom affordable units within the scheme. And all units meet the London Plan size standard. In terms of separating distances to neighbours, not so clear on there, but generally the distances are very, very good. You're looking at, excuse me, for Block A, which is the one on the left, it's over 27 metres from the Feltom 355 building. And then from the properties to the north on Station Estate Road, the distances range from around 20 to 26 metres to the houses there. And then Block B, you're looking at 30 to 39 metres to Station Estate Road, and then 26 to 29 metres to properties on New Road. Back on the site itself, the two main amenity spaces, the light green area is the portion of the site which would receive more than the 2 hours that is on 2 hours of sunlight on the equinox, the March equinox, which is one of the tests for quality of amenity space. So you can see the vast majority of that space complies. And then I think we had a few queries about the wind microclimate impacts, and that was thoroughly tested. And there's a document within the application documents. It showed that almost all of the tested points are satisfactory for any of the normal types of uses, so sitting, walking, or going from A to B. There were 3 points where they weren't suitable for sitting. One of those is near a refuse store. Another one is where you're going in between the buildings, so you're walking, you're not going to be sitting. And another one was on a footpath, or again, where you're walking. In respect of the garden spaces to neighbours on Station Estate Road, again, there's an image here which is showing sunlight received on the equinox. The red areas would be the area where effectively the sunlight is lost at that stage. So you can see, again, the vast majority of the garden is still going to achieve what is one of the recommended standards of the PRE. And then in terms of tree removal, where trees are within the building's footprint or the access footprints, they would be removed. There's around 14 trees that are removed plus hedging. The scheme does include replacement hedging and replacement tree planting, and there's 43 new trees being planted. This is just an image of where the trees are that would be lost. So there's alongside the pathway to the west, some at the rear, and then some along the frontage. Then we have a replacement tree planting scheme. So the idea is to create a green buffer along that boundary with Station Estate Road. So there is a mixture of retained trees, but new planting, new trees all along that boundary. But also be new street trees and new trees up in the northwest corner. And in respect of the overall scheme and its recommendation, on balance, we've considered that the benefit of the new housing, in particular, the regeneration of the site, as has been mentioned, it is included within the emerging local plan review as an allocated site for housing. It's recommended to be part of the new station quarter around Feltom Station, where, given the proximity to the town centre, given the highly accessible location, so it's accessible to buses and rail transport, it is amongst the most suitable sites for new housing that we have. I'd note that the new London plan from March of this year increased the borough's housing target from 822 to 1,782 homes per annum. As you've also heard, we have a long waiting list for affordable homes. This is a scheme which would deliver both market housing and affordable housing. It is a sustainable location. It's close to the town centre, shops and services, and amenities. The impacts on the neighbours, we do think that the scheme is satisfactorily accounted for those. So the scheme does moderate in height and the massing towards the boundary. There is a buffer along the boundary of Station Estate Road. And we do have a number of recommended conditions which will cover items such as the tree planting, servicing, controls on noise, and so on. So, and with all of those considerations, on balance, we have recommended approval subject to the conditions. There is the addendum report, and there would also be planning obligations.
Thank you, Shane. Okay, now it's over to questions, please, from members. I see, okay. Councillor Mel Collins first, okay. Can you manage your mic? It's in the middle at the front.
Are we there? Yes. There.
Yeah, excellent. Well done.
First of all, a very, very quick comment and say how delighted I am to see that if this is approved, that there are 18 units specifically for people with disabilities. Shane, I've got one question, unless I missed it. Can you tell us the meterage between the two blocks? You gave us the meterage between all of the surrounding areas and the two blocks. You didn't give us the distance between the two blocks.
Yes, I can. So at the closest point, which is that sort of pinch point where the two corners of the blocks are adjoining each other, it's 2.9 meters. Obviously, as the buildings lengthen in each direction, that separating distance increases. That's obviously very close. But the units and the layouts are designed so that we don't have windows directly opposite each other. And in some of the units, there's bedrooms in those corners. The idea obviously being to try and avoid having the main living areas in close proximity.
You're happy with that? Okay, I'm just checking, Mel. There isn't anything else coming up. That's okay. Thank you. Okay. No, fine. Yeah. John Todd, please. Oh, sorry, Councillor John Todd.
Shane, that was a tour de force, that description. You're listening to me at last. Good. Okay. You heard my comments about the London plan to the applicant. I thought I'd give you the courtesy of responding. In simple terms, what are the issues the mayor's raising? Can we go ahead and approve it if we feel so fit with that caveat outstanding?
Yes, so as we've heard, the application is one that's referable to the mayor, and they have 2 opportunities to comment. So they've given their stage 1 comments, which are summarised in the addendum. They do support the principle of the scheme, and particularly the housing. There's a couple of items where they've raised further queries. First one is in terms of urban design. They wanted to understand the rationale behind effectively the layout. They did raise concerns. I had discussions with them about the open space at the front. So they were concerned about enclosing that with a high wall and how that would appear in the townscape. And our response to that really was that this was, as I said, this was probably the optimal location given the access and the aspect, sorry. In terms of the high wall and the enclosure, given it's very close to the station, it's also alongside New Road, it's alongside the pathway to the parkland. And on the advice of the Met Police, it was considered that it should be enclosed, just to try and maybe deter, given it's the main amenity space, deter some antisocial behaviour that may potentially arise. That was really one of their main issues. In terms of transport, they had some queries around some of the data, the trip generation data. They also had a series of items which they wanted to have been addressed, so a delivery and service plan, a construction logistics plan, and a travel plan. Each of those has been addressed, and TfL now has no concerns with the application. So there's conditions on each of those items. And then they also had some, what I'd say was sort of, again, clarification on what's called the whole life carbon assessment. So there's some information that they require in their own format for them to assess it, and they've asked for that to be done. That would be done by the applicant prior to the stage 2 stage. And they also wanted to try and see if the urban greening factor, so the amount of sort of green space on the site, could be maximised, and they wanted that to be demonstrated. And again, the applicant can go back to them on that point.
Can I just go back briefly? What's the situation regarding gas and boilers in there? I asked that because in a recent application in Brentford, a planners or Hounslow Homes thought some of the equipment was too complicated for the average person to work, and they put a sort of gentle caveat in the report saying that may inhibit. So I'm giving you the opportunity to respond to that.
Well, in this scheme, there aren't any gas boilers proposed. The source for the hot water and heating is air source heat pumps. And I also believe there'd be some on-site renewable energy produced by solar PV panels on the roof.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Tony Lukey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you would expect, quite a few here. Look at page 31, 8.3. It was about the infrastructure, community infrastructure. It says here that there's sufficient capacity for primary schools and secondary students to accommodate child yield estimates. But which schools are we looking at, Shane? And I'll ask a few more and you can come back with the whole list. So there's schools, and make a note of that. And the one below, local healthcare, 8.31. There is limited capacity for new patients. Yeah, where are people going to go to the doctors? Which surgeries are going to be used? Feltom Centre for Health has a proposed infrastructure improvement. When's that due? And how will this application contribute towards it? You mentioned 8.33 here, and this is a regular one on our planning, but I've been away a little while. That's not a euphemism. Securing opportunities for construction training. Yeah, how long term is this? We often get this, and we had this at the last planning meeting from the from the Chamber of Commerce. Oh, we'll provide jobs. How long do these jobs last? How do we monitor these? Because I've never seen any figures in a number of years being on the planning committee. I've never seen any figures on how many people have gone through construction training, and the outcomes and the end result, and how many people are still in construction as a result, or what qualifications they achieve. Always put this in because it's like motherhood and apple pie, but we never really get the results. So there is that aspect of it, but where are these jobs coming from, and how many are we going to get? We still go. I'm not going to pick up again on that not policy compliant. And there's a whole rake of items in 8.57. Those other measures, adequate facilities for waste and recycling. And we know he's lucky he's not here, Councillor Lambert, as the representative of the other council firms. But the way that the waste, the inefficiency of waste storage in other developments that we've approved. Yeah, how we guaranteed, it's all right approving it here, but what are you yourselves doing to monitor the waste storage here and the efficiency of recycling and waste residual waste collection from these blocks? It says here, materials where practical, new building materials will be sourced locally. It shouldn't be where practical. It should be, they should be sourced as locally or as possible. But we need to pin these. We need to pin the developers down on these, and we don't see it because we see lorries turning up and churning up our streets. Yeah, great to have bat boxes and green roofs, but they're not particularly, and bird boxes, again, they're not particularly detailed. And want to see some detail on that at some point, maybe not tonight, but definitely at some point in the future. Again, all right, putting it down in a report, but what are you doing to check up on that? Because I don't think enough checking is done on this. There's a lot of reliance on the partnership, or the infectiousness of partnership, as I call it. Considerations of the circular economy. Yeah, what is the outcome of those considerations? Yes, I am on a bit of a roll. I'm sorry.
Can I just, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you now, Tony, because I don't think it's very fair on Shane for the moment. I'd like him to get some answers to those questions, and then you can come back with any
thank you, Chair.
supplementary.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just starting with your first ones, Councillor, about the infrastructure. So in respect of the education, an impact on schools from new residents. These sites are all the ones that are allocated in our emerging local plan. They have considered capacity as part of their evidence background. But we also have consulted the relevant schools team within the council. So the catchment, I can't tell the exact number of schools, but they've confirmed to me that there is sufficient capacity for the number of students, or the number of school-age children that would be generated within this scheme, and that no contributions required. In respect of health, the infrastructure delivery plan talks about, as I've mentioned in the report, the enhancement of the existing health facilities in Feltom. That's part of, partly funded by central government. There's also the SIL money from the scheme. So for Hounslow, I think the SIL money is around 1.3 or 1.4 million pounds. So there's elements of that which would be able to be directed to that sort of facility. In respect of the skills training, we have a planning obligation to address that. It's a requirement from our local plan and the London plan that any major development that we look to try and provide opportunities for local people to obtain skills in construction. I believe this developer, EcoWorld, do run their own successful programs. They have the option of providing entry into that if they've got a particular program. Otherwise, there's a formula where the developer would pay the council a contribution, and then we would run it. You're right about the sort of the monitoring. I've found that sort of fluctuates depending on who we have, but we have a team at the council who are dealing specifically with this at the moment. And I'm sure that they will be able to provide you with some up-to-date figures on the success, the numbers, and the existing programs and the planned programs. And I can make a note of that and respond to you on that. In respect of some of those other measures, sustainable measures, so with waste, the refuse and recycling areas are designed to meet the borough standards. And as I noted earlier, the servicing would take place off-road. There's space at the base of each building, so they're convenient for each of the residents. In terms of the materials, we can only go so far as we're sort of allowed to direct people where they can purchase the materials. Obviously, we can encourage them to do it locally, but there's a costing there. With respect of the ecological improvements, the bird and bat boxes, for example, condition 29 requires full details of it's an ecological management and monitoring and maintenance plan. And so that covers the bird and bat boxes, but also invertebrates, details of the green and brown roofs, and monitoring for all of those and how effective they are. And it's the last point of the condition, talks about a report and monitoring period of 30 years. And so our in-house ecologist would be looking and expecting to receive that sort of information, and they'd be the one who would sign off on the details of that.
Okay, Councillor Lukey, any final questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to come back to the parking and say when I was down there the other day with my friend Councillor Mitchell. I was able to park up. The trains were out, so I couldn't get the train down from Isleworth. But parking up seemed quite easy on a Saturday. And after operational hours, people will draw in or drive in and park up in areas where there's no operation. And I see and I hear the reasons I hear that other developments have got some have put some money towards or got some conditions towards parking or reviewing parking in the area. Why can't this development contribute towards that? Because if there are apart from disabled spaces, there's no parking there for all these units. People have cars. People will buy cars. People will use cars. They might leave early in the morning and come back late at night. And the stress is not necessarily going to be in the daytime. It's going to be after hours. So I see you got Kieran there, and he's really bored at the moment. So what appears that way from here? What we're going to do? What we're going to do to get this development to contribute towards some mitigation there on parking? That's look, you know what? I'm gonna leave it at that because I could go on.
Thanks very much, Councillor.
Yeah, you're welcome, Chair.
Okay, can I pass over, Kieran?
Yeah, thank you. As outlined in the report, we have secured CPZ contributions to consult on CPZs on the surrounding areas where there aren't any CPZs already. Most of those are within outside of a 300-meter walk, so it's unlikely to be used by residents. But nonetheless, we will be consulting on CPZs in those areas where there aren't any. I do take the point about weekend parking, because there are 2 CPZs currently beside the site that don't operate on a Saturday. But CPZ hours aren't static, so we're always reviewing CPZs, and there will be funding from developments to review those. And if it's the case that Saturday parking or later in the evening parking is causing a problem for residents in CPZs, they can be consulted, and if it's causing so much of an issue that they want the hours extended, then we'd be happy to extend them.
Councillor Ajmad-Gurul.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick one, Shane. It says, we're coming to the car parking. You said you have 7 blue badge spaces, but the availability for another 11 should the need arise. Where would they be? What would you lose to supply these? And also a very silly question, naive question, which is just for my peace of mind. You say it's a brick construction. Does that mean there's no cladding anywhere at all?
So in respect of the disabled parking, there would be 7 spaces provided from the outset, and they are, fortunately we've got an image behind you now. So they're running along that rear diagonal boundary of the site. They're perpendicular to the properties on Station Estate Road, and then just off the turning area, there's 2 separate spaces which are sort of rectangular shaped, and they'll be laid out in a manner which they wouldn't be lawn or anything like that. They'll be left as potential spaces in the future, and that's where the 11 spaces are. So under the London plan, you have to provide a certain minimum, but you have to make allowance for the potential full provision. But in the meanwhile, that space might be able to be used by residents for other purposes if it's not needed at the moment. So all of the spaces are provided in that rear courtyard. In respect of the building construction, the information that we have is that it would be your concrete frame and brick material, so there wouldn't be any of the cladding issue that we've seen on other properties.
Abby, okay. Oh, Councillor Alan Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, it was a question I posed earlier, possibly to the wrong people. Just referring again to the addendum, page 3, the Hounslow officer response, secure by design, condition 24, where you discuss with these providing an opportunity to, talking about the buildings we're talking about tonight, refine their height and appearance as appropriate. Could you just clarify what you mean by that? Thank you. Going forward.
Yeah, that's probably not as clear as I could have made it. So the reference to refining the height is specific to refining the height of the boundary walls, so not the buildings. So if in negotiations with the secure by design officer and the GLA, the conclusion is that we might have lower walls around that space, that's an option. I'm sorry that wasn't as clear as it could have been.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Councillor Vikram Gurul.
Thank you, Chair. Shane, I've just got 3 questions for you, and apologies if these were asked before. I know that the objectors mentioned about the extra 2 stories of this site compared to the maximum limit of others at 12 and 14. Have you assessed the economic impact of potentially reducing it by 2 stories, and what would that would do for the local economy and local area? Second question, what's the CO2 footprint of this site, and how renewable is it, and can we go further to make it a net zero site? And then thirdly, and apologies, maybe Councillor Todd asked this before, but I may just ask again, is obviously there were 2 consultations that took place. So from the feedback given from the public and some of the objectives, what changes did we make to the final report, if any? Thank you.
Yeah, in respect of your first question, we haven't specifically carried out an exercise to see what would be viable if there's 2 stories fewer. But what we obviously have done is looked at the viability that was provided, and that's very clear that to achieve the 50%, this was and what has been achieved is the maximum reasonable amount of affordable housing. Without the volume and the height, you're not going to achieve the level of affordable housing that's being proposed. So if we look at it that way, it has been considered. So to take off 2 floors would make the scheme effectively unviable, as is proposed. In respect of the sort of carbon emissions performance of the scheme, it's achieving a 70% reduction from the target baseline from building regulations, and that's achieved from the air source heat pumps and the solar PV panels, and also just the inherent energy efficient building design that they've come up with. To achieve the zero carbon requirement, they will have to provide a carbon offset contribution, which, having exhausted all of the other sort of options, there isn't any more space on the roof to put further PV panels, for example. So they'll be making a contribution of £202,000, I think, to our carbon offset fund, which the council would then be able to use to fund other projects to offset any carbon emissions. As far as the consultation goes, I think we did hear from the agent that they did a leaflet drop. They did an online, they had a website, and they had an online consultation. I think they had, I've written down here, they had 79 respondents. A lot of the matters were in respect of the height. We did throughout the pre-application process look at a lot of different options for the height and massing. The number of homes and the viability does come into that. This did appear to be, in our opinion, a good scheme. The DRP found it an acceptable scheme. As far as the changes go, in that process, that design discussion process, which is set out in the design access statement, options were tested. I know at the pre-app stage, taller buildings were spoken about. As far as the Neighbours go, I think the changes were probably fairly minor from what I gather the agent has told us about. So I couldn't list them off from the consultation, but they have, through talking to us and engaging with the officers, we have made and achieved changes to the original scheme. So there's increased setbacks, the unit numbers and the mix and the overall heights were adjusted in that process.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very small supplementary. I just will put it on record, I have no qualms with no car park spots beyond the need for the blue badge holders, and there should be a spot for every blue badge holder that needs it on that site. But was underground car parks or parking, was that explored?
In our initial discussions, we identified that this, given the location, it's got very high accessibility to public transport. So the rating it's got is very good, clearly because it's very close to the station and also a good number of bus routes. The advice from us and also from TfL is that this should be a car-free scheme. I haven't, I'm not aware of any discussions in respect of basements. An option in respect of sort of a podium was looked at in respect of maybe open space. But no, I think it was always going to be a site which car-free would be insisted upon.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so thank you both very much. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Kieran. And we're now moving on to discussion. I've already had a number of people signal to me. So, Councillor Richard Foote.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to say one of the things that is predominant in my mind in looking at this development is my members' casework, which is predominantly consisting of homeless families or families living in overcrowded conditions who are going to be the major beneficiaries of a scheme of this nature. And I can't do anything but feel pleased to see that there's, out of the number of families that are living in the Feltom area that are either not in proper accommodation or living in overcrowded accommodation, is going to benefit from this is considerable. And that's something that I feel that I have to commend, and it's very high in my feelings on this. I also look at the building in itself, and I don't find it unattractive. But I do recognise that that's all in the eye of the beholder. But, you know, for me, I think, you know, we've seen what cladding has done, and I think, you know, what's been said, and that's sort of those sort of problems, but that's not there now. Just one other, I was going to put in one question, which I've put in on virtually every planning meeting we've been in the last year, but it's really about the carbon offset contribution. We hear a lot of comment about it, but we have asked, can we see where it's you know, what it's coming to, what does it consist of now, and where is it going to? We don't see any of that information, and I really, as I said, I've asked this question on a number of previous planning meetings. I would like to start to see some answers on that, what that's happening with that fund. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Richard. I'll note that down as a point of discussion. Okay, thank you. Okay, I've seen a number of hands go up, and I'll just take them in the order I actually saw them. Councillor Todd, Councillor John Todd, was that a wave at me originally, or? Thank you. Okay, in that case, Councillor Michael Dennis.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, well, I think I follow Councillor Foote's comments, and I agree with them. And I think the colour that has been chosen and the difference between the buildings, it makes what would have been probably an ugly building actually quite attractive. So no, I like that aspect of it. But no, Councillor Garrawell actually made a really good point about the housing and the the fact that you've got not just that it's affordable, but flats where they have 3 beds, where you could actually get a family in, and that there are 24 of them. I'm really encouraged to see that. I think there are too many applications where you get affordable flats, and there's only 1 bed. That's not really solving the problem. But this I think is very much on the way to sort of helping to solve that problem and allow the council to achieve its housing ambitions. So that's really encouraging to see, and that's all I was going to say.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Tony Lukey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to say anything, and to be honest, until I heard Councillor Foote's comments. We all get casework on housing, but also, you know, whether it's in Feltham or Isleworth or Brentford or Osterley, but we also get casework on tall buildings. So whether this is currently not policy compliant from the existing local plan or even the future local plan or the draft local plan. So let's not yeah, we heard the argument last time down at Osterley, the Tesco home-based site, and we hear it every time. It is a mantra. Yes, we do know we need housing, but if these blocks were proposed as not one of 12 stories and not one of 14 or 10 stories and not one of 12 stories or however many stories it's going to be, and it was one of 14 stories or one of 16 stories, would we still go for it and say, yeah, our casework is for more housing? We know that, we do know that, but not at every cost and not at everywhere. So that is, I think that's, we'll get that. It's an open, it'll be open season for developers now to come in with non-policy compliant applications, and officers perhaps acquiescing to that, and members of this committee saying, yeah, we need housing. That's what I've got to say, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Vikram Gurul.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think Councillor Dennis makes such an important point about the 3-bedroom houses, and I really appreciate that. I think we are seeing too many developments of 1 and 2 bedroom units, which are simply not fit for purpose for the many families that email us all the time as councillors for housing casework. So this certainly meets that, and it's great to see every single 3-bedroom unit is on the affordable proportion of this development. I think it's a fantastic site for one particular reason, is that we have managed to secure 47.7, so I'll round up to 48 because I'm a bit of an optimist, 48% of the units being affordable. That will go a decent way for helping us with them, as I said, about 3,000 odd families on the waiting list, and meet the challenges of the future, because we're in a housing crisis. We have been for a long time, and we simply need to maximise the use of sites in a sustainable way. And I see this as one of them. I will just say, lastly, I've been going in and around that area my entire life, and the local economy has picked up in recent time, but it certainly needs a bit more impetus, and having 178 units there will certainly help the local economy, the shops that are there, as I've seen too many units come and go because of a lack of footfall and a lack of business. So it's great to see that this will stimulate the local economy on that element as well. So thank you, Chair, for your time, and again, thank you, Councillor Dennis, for the 3-bedroom acute observation.
Okay, does anyone want to do anything? Oh, that's from Councillor Mel Collins, moving approval, and seconded by Councillor Harleen Atwell here. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have approval on the table. I was going to ask you just to put your hands up so we knew what was going on, but actually I do need to also make sure that everybody states how they're voting. Okay, so I think we'll skip everybody pile in. I'll just start. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'll start with Councillor Mel Collins. Thank you. Councillor Harleen Atwell. 4. Thank you. Councillor Saraj Bajwa. 4. Thank you. Councillor Tony Lukey.
I'll abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Richard Foote. Councillor Samia Chowdhury.
4, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Dennis.
4.
Councillor John Todd.
4.
Councillor Ajma Grewal.
4.
Councillor Alan Mitchell.
4.
Councillor Vikram Grewal.
4.
Councillor Gary Grewal. Okay, and I'll be also supporting this. Okay. Did you get all of that, Wendy? Sorry. Thank you. Okay. So that has been approved. And one thing I'm going to be saying to them is, the developers, I shall be looking very carefully at your ecological monitoring and what you're actually going to put in there. I'm going to put in a quick idea for Swift boxes as well. So I'll probably be following that one up. Thank you very much. Okay, there's going to be a short adjournment while those people who need to leave have the opportunity to do so safely and remembering social distancing. And he's on his way, so that's fine. Okay, so just checking. Have I got Colin Smith? Colin Smith? Yes, thank you. And Vilna? I thought that's who you both were. Okay. I'm going to, if you'd like to move to the the chair, then I'll get the planning officer to do a brief overview of what it is. If you'd like to move, you're fine. Yeah, yeah. Oh, for goodness sake. Okay, I'll let you have 2 minutes. Go on. No. You can get there and back. Come on. Plenty of room in there. Go on. Okay, can we recommence, people? I'm just checking I've got all the councillors that I well, possibly not. Sorry about this, Colin. Right. All right. So, just waiting for Jimmy to come back. And I've got everybody. That's right. Okay. Okay. Okay, we'll recommence. Right, just before Matthew does a brief overview of the next item for planning, Councillor Richard. Thank you very much. And can I have that seconded, please? Thank you, okay, Jimmy. So so we conclude the matters. Okay, so briefly, Matthew, if you would mind, this is Quattro, land forming part of Fulham Western International Market, Southall Lane, Heston. That is pages 86 to 106, and there is quite considerable amount on your addendum item. And Matthew, can you do a brief overview, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Rees. I'm the Head of Development Management. I'm just going to put one slide on your screen just for the purposes of this short presentation at the start. This is the Old Western International Market site, and on that site is a construction waste facility run by Quattro. It's on the bottom right-hand corner of that slide, well, bottom right-hand quarter of that slide. It includes a batching plant and a construction waste facility. On to the left of that is our own household waste facility, and to the north, which is going to be quite pertinent for the presentations that are coming, is Costco. And within Costco, there is an audiology room, which is on the southern side of the building. So it's on the boundary with the construction waste facility. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Some members were on planning committee at the time this application came in front of you in 2017, twice actually, because it was deferred once. It was approved as a facility for 3 years. Subsequent to that, it was erected, but not in accordance with the approved plans. There were some changes involved due to them having to give up some land to the west of the site. So it is now back in front of you as a retrospective application to retain the facility as it is and to extend the time period of the application. And I will leave it at that and leave it to the speakers for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Okay, we have the objector speaking. It's Colin Smith. Okay, Colin, you have 5 minutes and we'll let you know 30 seconds before the end. Okay.
Chair, I'm Colin Smith, instructed by Virtus Data Centres, who operates a site to the northwest, to object to the proposed development. I've previously written to the Council with concerns and objections for this and previous developments on this and adjoining sites. My clients object as the proposal is a departure from the development plan and because of the impact on their data centre site, an acknowledged sensitive site. The main change of significance to the layout of the site to my clients is that the concrete batching plant is relocated 11 metres further west, closer to the data centre, and an additional concrete silo is proposed. In granting temporary permission in 2018, the committee specifically made the point that both Costco to the north and the data centre should be considered sensitive uses, and the conditions for the temporary permission were built around safeguarding my clients' future operations. My clients have asked me to emphasise they are supporting critical government platforms within their data centres and are enabling businesses to keep workers safe during the pandemic by hosting cloud office applications at this site. The temporary permission was for 3 years, a limited period of time that with the previously identified conditions could have minimised the impact on the adjoining sensitive uses. That initial 3 years have passed. The temporary use should have ceased in January 2021, but has been carried on and continues to carry on at a greater intensity of use than originally proposed. The applicant failed to gain approval for the necessary monitoring and mitigating reports. The result is a completely unmonitored facility that is able to do whatever it wants with zero consequences. The submitted planning statement states that in the 12 months to March 2020, the plant produced 65,000 cubic metres of concrete compared to 50,000 cubic metres of concrete per year anticipated in the original submission, and that this is a maximum output over a year going forward. Although the CBP may be relocated, resulting in a 25% reduction in output, there is currently an increase of 30% over the original 2018 proposals. Given the lack of clarity in the associated mineral extraction application, it is not clear what annual output of concrete would derive from the concrete batching plant. This is critical to my clients. Although the submitted air quality assessment and dust management and monitoring plan documents claim that the majority of operations would be carried out within enclosed or screened areas or would be damped down, and that given the separation distances, the impact of residual emissions is highly unlikely to result in a significant effect at the nearest sensitive receptors, this is not the experience of Virtus. My clients can see the facility has had an impact on the data center as they have had to change the air conditioning filters much more regularly than the manufacturer's recommendations. The site of the data center was chosen due to the specific requirements of the operation, which involves air cooling, and before the application site was allocated for waste use in the West London Waste Plan. Although Costco has chosen not to be represented at this committee, they have also objected to this application on the grounds of dust and noise. There is therefore a significant conflict with policy WLWP4 of the development plan, which requires that adequate means of controlling noise, vibration, dust are incorporated into the scheme for development of the site. This has clearly not happened. The proposed dust suppression and mitigation measures are reliant on on-site personnel reacting to atmospheric and on-site conditions rather than being preventative. This could mean that pollution levels are already breached before any action is taken. In addition, the monitoring forms included in the dust management and monitoring plan state that in the event that monitoring is not adequate to control dust emissions, all on-site activities will cease until further dust suppression can be applied or weather conditions change. Given the commercial realities of operating the site, it's submitted that this is not a realistic aspiration, particularly if atmospheric conditions continue for any length of time. The consequence is that the applicants stand to be rewarded with a new, longer permission when it completely failed to deliver the site in accordance with the previous temporary permission. The disregard for planning law shown by the applicants demonstrates that they are not and never will be good neighbours to adjacent sites at this location. The application seeks to regularise the development and is not in accordance with the 2018 permission and to extend the period of use up to 2027. For the principle of the development, there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development, which means proposals should be approved that accord with an up-to-date development plan. The committee report identifies that in granting permission, the council would be departing from its development plan, as the West London Waste Plan allocates the site for apportioned use. This site is used for construction waste and it is proposed to use it for processing minerals extracted from the adjoining site. The MPPF allows permission to be granted for a departure from the development plan, but only if there are material considerations that indicate the plan should not be followed. The material considerations set out by the applicant
30 seconds, Speaker.
Thank you. I'll skip through those and just put to the committee that the material considerations should be afforded limited weight, not least because the application to the south for the site for the extraction of minerals has yet to be determined and is also not in accordance with the development plan, and it's only a safeguarded site for mineral extraction after 2029 and only if needed. In summary, the proposed development is not only a departure from the development plan, but also will have an impact on my client's site. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there any questions from members? Councillor Tony Lukey?
Yeah, I remember this from the last time, and we did receive assurances at the time that this will be better managed. How many breaches do you can you suggest have taken place at this site?
We simply don't know. The 2018 permission was granted with a raft of conditions which involved monitoring plans and a scheme for notifying when breaches were occurring and when emission levels or air quality changed and exceeded certain thresholds. But those conditions were either not submitted for approval or were submitted for approval and not determined before this current application is before you. So at the moment, there is no mechanism for identifying when a breach occurs or when specific thresholds have been exceeded.
Chair, thank you. And how many times has your client raised this with the council in the interim?
I'm not aware. I know that they have been in contact, though it's sort of not something as their planning consultant that I've been directly involved in, so I can't answer that, I'm afraid.
Councillor Guy Lambert.
Thank you, Chair. But you've clearly laid out that there seem to have been some, well, there clearly has been some breaches here. What impact has this had on your client? Has it interfered with the operation of their business without to close down or anything like that?
I'll try and explain without getting too technical. The data center is basically a huge warehouse full of computer servers, which generate a large amount of heat. And the most significant factor for data centers is the use of energy to cool down the servers or the rooms that the servers are in. This company, Virtus, operates a very efficient cooling system, but it's based on air cooling. Most data centers use water to cool, which uses an awful lot of energy. These data centers are much more efficient than traditional data centers, and they work by sucking in cool air from outside of the building and circulating it through the building, which cools down. The site selection process for these data centers is therefore very critical. This site was chosen and built before the West London Waste Plan allocated this site as a waste site. Before the West London Waste Plan emerged and was adopted, this whole area to the south of the West International Market was greenbelt. And if I remember correctly, part of the redevelopment of the international market was a contribution in funds to improve the greenbelt to the south of the site. So my clients selected the site, purchased the site, and developed the site on the basis that the area to the south would be undeveloped, and therefore there would be, the air that they were sucking into the building would be effectively clean air. If you look at the slide behind you, the data center building is the building on the left-hand side of the slide with the slightly curved roofs. And the whole of that southern side of the building that is facing the camera is essentially an enormous grill that sucks air into the building, cool air into the building. But since the data center was built, the household waste site has been developed. My clients were in fact, and myself were heavily involved in negotiating with the council on that to make sure that there were no openings on the side of the building that faced the data center, and there were certain safeguards put in place and conditions to do with, in the event of fire, sprinkler systems were included and all that sort of thing. If you can imagine, a fire at that site would end up with sucking ash into the building, which is not good. So we did negotiate quite deeply with the council in terms of that site. We tried to do the same for the original 2018 application on the current site, and we felt that the committee gave us a fair hearing at the time. They acknowledged that both ourselves and Costco were sensitive users. There was a range of conditions that were put in place, and it was only going to be for 3 years, primarily based on the fact that the applicants had to relocate in order to facilitate the Brentford Community Stadium redevelopment, and then that would give them 3 years. Would be enough time for them to find an alternative site to relocate to, and they would be away from this site, which is allocated for apportioned waste and not commercial waste, because as it is at the moment, it's a departure from the development plan. So for a 3-year period with sufficient safeguards and conditions, my clients were content. But now those conditions don't seem to have been, or those conditions haven't been effected, and we're now looking at a permission which has been going on for 3 years, more intensively than it was originally planned to go on for, with a greater output of concrete, and it's due to go on for well, it says in the application 2027, but it's also related to the mineral extraction site opposite, which is a safeguarded site and is safeguarded to only be used if necessary post 2029. And members will no doubt be aware that the Rectory Farm site has been granted permission for 3 million tonnes of minerals to be extracted, which is more than 4 times the apportioned amount for the borough. So it would seem to suggest there's no realistic need for the safeguarded site to the south to be developed for mineral extraction. all of that together would suggest that the period up to 2027 and beyond is not likely to be necessary for the application site. So as a material consideration, it should carry less weight. So I think that answers the question probably a bit more fully than it perhaps should.
Thanks. It was fascinating, but it actually didn't answer the question at all. The question was, what impact has it had on your client's business?
So
Have they had to close down? Have they had to?
Yes,
have they had outages? Have they had additional costs? What?
The impact of that is that the air that is being drawn into the building is full of dust. The air quality is lower. That is having an impact in terms. There's a whole system of filters that makes the air as clean as possible when it goes into the building. Those filters are routinely and constantly getting clogged, needing to be replaced. The maintenance is of them is increasing, which leads to, I can't say whether there have been outages. I haven't been told that there have, but it certainly has involved increased maintenance and the replacement of those filters, additional costs.
I understand.
And so
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor John Todd.
Good evening. Can you tell me your profession, sir?
I'm a planning consultant,
Planning
chartered planning consultant.
Okay, and I didn't catch the name of your client.
It's Virtus Data Centres.
Okay, thank you. Like colleagues, I was present at the earlier meeting. You've clearly got numerous grounds of objection. Were your objections included in this officer's report?
They were in the table that sets. I'm afraid I don't have the agenda in front of me in paper form. It's on my phone. But there is a table which sets out the respondents' comments or towards the front of the report.
They have.
And in, I think, the first box, it says that concerns were raised about dust and air quality emissions. That's the only reference to our representations that were made.
How long have you been dealing with this? A number of years or what?
Well, as I say, I was involved in 2018, and there was an application that was submitted in 2019, I think, which was then withdrawn. So I've been appraising my client of the implications of those applications and this one, of course.
You've talked about negotiations without going into detail. I understand that. Does your client have had negotiations with the London Borough of Hounslow, which have subsequently turned out to have been not implemented or reneged on, or what, outside the planning process?
For this particular site?
Yes.
No. When the 2018 application was submitted, there was some engagement with the applicants at the time. The applicants took myself, representatives from Virtus and Costco to one of their other operations. I think it was the one in Brentford actually, just to give us a demonstration of how a site worked. So there were discussions. We did have correspondence with the applicants, but we haven't directly had discussions with the London Borough of Hounslow, I believe.
Did anyone ever tell you that there was a breach in planning control on the site next door? Were you aware that they built whatever they built wasn't done in accordance with their planning permission?
For this application site?
No, yes. Not on this application, on the previous one.
Yes, I was very aware that the 2018 application, the development as it's built is not built in accordance with the 2018 permission. We were aware of that, and at the time, I and representatives of Costco wrote to the council to say that there was a breach of planning control and that it would be an enforcement matter, or it should have been an enforcement matter. But I'm not quite sure what happened internally, but the outcome of all of that was that this application was submitted to regularise the position.
What was the actual, as far as you're aware, what had they built that they weren't allowed to build, and what was that an additional impact on your client's business, or?
Yes, the most significant differences is that there's an additional concrete silo, which and that's related to the increase in the intensity of the use. They're now running at 65,000 cubic meters of concrete a year, as opposed to the original 50,000 cubic meters of concrete. And the concrete batching plant has been moved closer to the data center. So the activity is going on closer to my client's site. There are other changes. I don't recall off the top of my head what they are, but those are the most significant ones as far as my client is concerned.
But could you just clarify what the concrete operation is? Is it bagging it up or mixing it or what?
I think the next speaker may be able to give a bit more detail, but essentially it's bringing together minerals that...
Is it the manufacture of cement then?
Yeah, it mixes all the stuff together, and the output is a whole pile of cement, which is then taken away by lorries. So the raw material is brought in, and then the concrete is taken out. Okay. That's a very simplified version of events.
Okay, sorry. I overtalked you, I apologise. The report mentions dust in the same paragraph as air quality. I think they're two separate things. Have you had any tests made about the air quality?
I'm not an expert on either air quality or dust. I believe that the two things are related. Significant quantities of dust in the air can reduce the quality of the air. I'm not, I can't confirm whether my clients have carried out technical studies in relation to air quality over the time of the this site being in operation.
When you learned there was a breach, did you make any representations apart from to the council? Did you make it to the owners of the site?
Yes, I believe my clients did contact the operators of the site.
And what was their reaction? Did they change anything? Did they amend anything?
I'm not aware that they did. I contacted the council in using sort of official channels of identifying an enforcement breach. My clients contacted the applicants directly as a sort of a neighbourly issue, if you like. So I'm not aware of what the outcome of that was.
No, but you took prudent steps to minimise the damage to your client's premises.
Yes.
Were you surprised there was no enforcement action?
Yes, I think. Again, I can't recall when the matter was first raised with the council, but I believe it has been something in the order of at least 18 months, possibly up to 2 years, from when the matter was raised as a breach of planning control to where we are now in terms of this committee considering this application to regularise the breaches.
Okay, well, that's a very fair answer. The other point you made, which concerns me personally, is you implied that this site operated at various speeds, at various capacity, and there was no preventative action or equipment on the site which would minimise loss or damage to your client's equipment. Could you try and expand that a bit? Ideally, what would you like to have seen, apart from the premises being properly built?
Yeah, well, I think I don't think it's for us to necessarily design mitigation measures. That's really, I think, a matter for the applicant. But whilst we do accept that there are measures such as the bins where some of the minerals are stored have retaining walls to prevent dust flying about and so on. A lot of the monitoring and mitigation measures are based on personnel on site identifying problems that may occur and then responding to them. And as I said in my presentation, part of the monitoring is if the dust, for example, exceeds certain limits, that would need to be firstly identified, and B, if it can't be suppressed, all work on site is supposed to cease. At some point, somebody has to make a decision as to when the cessation of the operations stops and work can continue. In the meantime, presumably, no vehicles carrying material will be allowed onto the site. What happens to those? You know, there are quite a lot of unanswered questions in terms of the monitoring and mitigation issues.
staff does your client have and what's their turnover? Is it a huge organisation?
How many staff?
Yes.
That I can't answer, I'm afraid. I don't know how many they have or what the turnover is, unfortunately.
Councillor Richard Foote.
Yes, Chair. I'm a bit puzzled by some of this, but you've talked about, or you implied, that this is an increase in the amount of dust that's going around. And so I'm presuming by that there was a stage prior to that where there's a lesser operation than you're saying exists at the moment, which is what's causing the problem. Were there ever registered any problems when you were operating at this, or when this particular site was operating at the lower state of production?
Difficult to answer that question because there hasn't been any effective monitoring. However, the data center site was operating before this site was developed, and my clients can point to a clear and marked difference in terms of the maintenance regime for the air filters and the air quality and so on before and after the development of this site.
I can't see anybody else wanting to question the objector, so thank you very much indeed. Now it's over to the developer's representative. And we will start the 5 minutes when you are ready. And you start speaking.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name is Vilna Walsh. I'm the planning agent acting for Quattro. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the application this evening. It's firstly entirely acknowledged that the application is retrospective. It is for works which were progressed not in compliance with the approved scheme. Quattro are keen to emphasise that the situation arose as a result of matters entirely beyond their control. They were due to the combined effect of the available development site area unfortunately having to be reduced by Hounslow Borough Council Estates Department at a very late stage to accommodate the adjacent recycling depot, which resulted in the need for an amended layout coupled with the urgent need to vacate their Lionel Road Brentford site in a very short timescale to facilitate the development of the Brentford Community Stadium. Quattro have sought since then to work positively with the officers to resolve matters at the site. Quattro are also mindful of the small number of objections that have been made to the application. These have been reviewed in detail and responded to in full. It's relevant that the original application had full regard to the relationship with the proposal and its neighbours. In response to specific matters raised both by Costco and Virtus, the original application proposals were amended to provide additional enclosure around the construction and demolition waste storage area, provision of a wheel wash facility, provision of an operational method statement, close boarded fencing along the rear and western boundary, details to be submitted confirming the proposed location for storage of materials and means of enclosure and measures to control dust, and a noise management scheme to be submitted detailing the physical and operational measures proposed to mitigate noise. The scheme was approved on this basis, and the scheme as currently built incorporates all the features previously approved, with all details previously required to be submitted by condition, submitted upfront as part of a comprehensive application package. However, the current application proposals include further additional boundary treatment, enclosure of plant, and provision of additional misting sprays, which go beyond that previously considered necessary. Additionally, it's confirmed that Quattro has already gone through a rigorous process of securing an environmental permit, adding a further significant layer of control over and above that required by planning. Quattro have an exemplary track record across the suite of sites they operate and are well-established and well-respected operators in the construction and waste industry. At the Southall Lane site, in the 3 years they've been in operation, there has been no direct complaint made to them in terms of either noise or air quality considerations, nor as far as Quattro are aware has there been a complaint made to the EHO on grounds of noise or air quality, and certainly no visits have been made to the site on that basis by the EHO. The applicant, through the progression of both the original application and this one, has sought to address matters raised by objectors in a positive way. However, it is important to highlight that the site has been allocated to waste management uses and envisaged specifically for municipal waste purposes for some significant period of time, so it is a location where these types of operations are expected to be located. We welcome the committee report as prepared by your officers and which confirms their support in terms of the acceptability in principle of the proposal and confirmation that in terms of environmental and amenity considerations, the proposals are acceptable. The ability to retain the current operations at the site at Southall Lane for a further temporary period are critical to safeguarding an established in-borough business and a significant number of associated jobs, and enable further time to secure a permanent relocation site for all on-site operations. Again, it's reiterated that Quattro only relocated to the Southall site from their Brentford site to assist in facilitating the development of the Brentford Community Stadium. It remains the case that the structures erected can be dismantled within a short time frame. The site will be left cleared, laid to hard standing, appropriately linked to services and ready for occupation by any subsequent conforming apportioned waste use. This is an improvement in terms of the physical state of the site prior to Quattro taking control. Works completed to date, particularly with regard to boundary treatment, pedestrian access and linkage to services, have significantly improved the site and its future prospects. As agreed at pre-app stage, the retrospective application has been subject to a full new planning application rather than a Section 73 amendment. This has ensured that all relevant supporting technical assessments which were previously commissioned to assess the proposals have been undertaken again. The approach has been thorough and robust and is clear in concluding that the proposals do not give rise to any potential for significant adverse effects. Further, the scheme incorporates tangible improvements on a proposal that has already been considered as acceptable. This includes additional enclosure of operational buildings, plant and site boundary, additional mitigation sprays, greater area of landscaping retained on the boundary with Southall Lane and EV charging points provided. The assessment has shown that traffic generation is below that previously estimated. In all respects, the proposals are the same or indeed improve upon that previously permitted. It also supports the local construction industry and is a highly sustainable operation. The facility has enabled the diversion from landfill and recycling of some 240,000 tonnes of waste so far. Quattro have worked positively and proactively with your officers to regularise the situation and look at what scope there's been to make further improvements to the proposals. That, combined with the history, the policy context, and the robust technical assessment and the key benefits, we ask that you consider this application positively and hope that it can be supported. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the developers representative, please. Councillor John Todd.
Good evening. Would you like to address the comments made by the objector about noise, pollution, risk, please? And any other matter that you would help justify your case?
Thank you, yes. Yeah, thank you. Obviously, we have taken on board the comments and they were made in writing on the application, and our respective noise and air quality consultants responded on those, as did your own officers and I believe consultants that you instructed yourselves directly, and all have come to a view that the proposal is acceptable. There have been changes to the scheme in terms of proximity to the Virtus site, but in terms of the key principles, which are the orientation of the plant, and the enclosure of the plant, those principles have not changed at all. That process is a fully enclosed process. So while there may be an additional cement silo, obviously you can't handle cement in the open air. It's a controlled substance. It's pumped into the cement silos under a sealed system. So whether there's 2 or whether there's 3, the potential for impact is highly controlled and negligible. So that isn't in itself going to lead to additional concerns. The key points are, whilst there's been some changes in the configuration of the layout, all of the mitigation that was previously envisaged is in place, and additional mitigation has been proposed as part of this application and in discussion with your officers.
Okay, do you want to carry on? Would you agree it's a matter of fact that you've been in breach? The last time you came here, we gave you planning permission, and you, from the outset, you were in breach, and you're in breach at the moment until we give you planning permission.
Yep, I agree entirely with that. You're absolutely right. There were some very specific reasons for that, but the fact remains that the proposal is in breach. We have had an application in since August last year. There was extensive discussions with officers leading up to that. Obviously, it's not been the easiest to put together an application. We started work on the application in January or February, I believe, last year, just before, obviously, the impacts of the pandemic. So it's been a challenge, to say the least, but the application was submitted in August last year. Prior to that, we had submitted virtually all of the discharge of condition applications that were required to be submitted, and the environmental permit has been progressed, which is certainly from a technical perspective considered to be a more rigorous process than and another additional layer of control on the site over the planning layer. So yes, we are in breach, but what's been built out in terms of the principles established previously is the same as what was previously approved, and we are now having reconsidered the proposals and discuss it with the officers, providing more.
Okay, well, my understanding is, well, you've agreed a breach is very fair, and clearly you should have been prosecuted. That's my view, but that's for other people to decide. When you say you've been rushing around to do an application, you were given a 3-year period extension. So you knew you were coming to an end, whatever it is, this year, next year. Why did you have to rush around? Why hadn't you done anything in the period previously?
All I can say is we were working with the authority to progress an application under challenging circumstances. The operator, in terms of building out the proposal, were very concerned about safeguarding a large number of jobs and their existing business. Their change to the available site came at a very late time period in the build-out process. The proposals were reconfigured because of the timescales under which, the pressures under which they were working to relocate from the Brentford site. And all of those, unfortunately, led to a situation where I'm not trying to hide the fact that the proposal is in breach, and I'm sure should have been resolved more quickly. But Quattro are an established business, a large number of jobs were on the line, and that's what they were focusing on at the time. We then engaged positively with your officers. We were then, we couldn't possibly have predicted the impact of the pandemic. And certainly at the early stages, it's very difficult. Everyone was trying to work out how to progress noise assessments, air quality assessments in that context. We've come some period of time from there, and we are all able to now work on that basis, and we understand how we can progress those assessments, even with restrictions in place. February, March time.
I mean, I hear what you say about the air depot being an encumbrance, but that's minimal impact, really. Surely you knew you had, or your clients knew that they had a 3-year period. They blatantly carried on, made no adjustments, and the next door neighbours got to go through difficult periods, concerned with the viability and security of his business. And now you come back for another 4 years. Why should we grant it?
I entirely take your point, and I can see the uncomfortable situation that leaves Quattro in, and me as their planning agent, and I do accept that. All I can say is explain the reasons why it happened. We're not saying that makes it right at all, and we've put our hands up to the fact that there's a breach. But in terms of considering the planning merits of the proposals, we have a scheme that matches and or improves the scheme that was considered previously. There's a scheme that has support from the West London Waste Authority in terms of, whilst the proposal is not for apportioned waste uses, it is for a waste use on a site that is currently not needed for apportioned waste uses. So that gets over the hurdle of the planning bar in terms of the policy position. We, with your officers, agreed that we would put a full new application in rather than a Section 73 application to allow every aspect of the proposal to be reconsidered and reassessed. That's been done. Every report has been reassessed based on the relocated plant and the additional features that are going to be put in. So in terms of the planning merits of the case, our view, and certainly the view of your officers and their report, is that the proposal should be granted. But I do understand where you're coming from, and I'm not going to shy away from the fact that it is an uncomfortable situation. And I am here, I was obviously presenting at the last committee, and I'm here again putting this case forward.
Nice to see you again, unfortunate circumstances. But my final point is this: the report implies that you're negotiating with some third party for a further site. Can you clarify your timescale of that, or is that just speculative?
So I'm not the planning agent acting for that other site, but Quattro have another application in for the greenbelt land to the south of the site for the mineral extraction that is not linked to this application. This application has been assessed purely on the basis that it's for the retention of the plant for a 7-year period and dealing and operating in the way that it currently operates. The other application has been submitted and is under consideration. I can't obviously prejudge where your officers are going to get to with that application, whether it's going to be approved or not.
As a layman, you're saying they're not moving in the current site that you want to get the extension for elsewhere.
Sorry, you mean relocation? Sorry, I thought you were asking about the other.
Let's call it the cement works.
So in terms of relocation from our site, so we've secured, there is a relocation site that has been secured for the concrete batching part that we recently got planning permission on. The application was in for over 1.5 years. So conditions need to be discharged on that site. We've recently completed on the Section 106 agreement. So there is a relocation site for the concrete batching facility. Quattro have struggled to find an alternative site for the waste facility. They are difficult sites to find. There aren't that many sites that are allocated for that use. If you're even going to an industrial area, you're competing at higher value land uses. That has been the real struggle, and that's why the additional period of time is needed to allow them to find an alternative site for the waste facility, which we haven't been able to secure so far. Thank you.
Councillor Tony Lukey.
You heard from the Neighbours representative. What does this planning application here in front of us give? How much succor will that give to their concerns, your neighbours' concerns? Will they have to be changing their filters more regularly? Will they be using more power as a result? How much have you shared? How much has your client shared the proposal with the neighbours?
There are additional measures proposed. There's additional boundary treatment, additional mitigation sprays proposed. But I think, as I outlined already, the key elements of the proposal, the enclosure and the way it's operated, are the same as were approved previously and were assessed thoroughly the first time round and have been reassessed both by us and by your technical representatives within the council, and I believe outsourced as well to consultants to review the noise and air quality assessments. So whilst there are additional measures that will be built out if approval is granted, I'm sure Quattro would be very keen to discuss matters further with the objector as to if there's anything else that could be put in place. But the comments were made about the way that the site is operated and that it's reactive, and I would take issue with that point. There are physical measures in place on the site that are there to control dust and noise. There are preventative operational measures in terms of the way the site is managed to prevent overspill or emissions of noise and dust. And then the final fallback is the reactive measures for if there is visible dust. Now, those measures are in place for if there's an unusual event, if it's extremely dry and windy, for example, and it's to do with if the stock, you can see dust coming off the stockpiles, for example, in those situations where operations need to cease until they've been properly dampened down and brought under control. So there are different stages and measures of control that are physical, that are preventative operationally, and then reactive is the final fallback, as well as the environmental permit, which has all, if not more, of the measures that have been submitted as part of the planning application in place.
Okay, and what happens after December 2027?
The intent, well, as I've already said, the concrete batching plant or relocation site has been secured for that. Quattro have been working to find an alternative site for the waste facility. Hounslow themselves will know the difficulty that there is in finding alternative waste sites. It was them that were able to find this site as a temporary measure to assist with the Brentford redevelopment, but that is being actively progressed in terms of seeking an alternative site for them to move on from this site. At some point or other, we assume the West London Waste Authority, and it's a requirement of the planning that there's a Section 106 agreement. That means that we have to vacate the site with a year's notice if it's needed before the end of the 7 years, let alone when the 7 years is up.
I can't see anybody else who'd like to ask questions of the developer, so thank you very much indeed. And then we'll pass over to Matthew to go through the report, and no doubt there'll be extensive questions, Matthew, following. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll give a bit more of a substantive presentation, first of all. So we're in the Heston West Ward. The application site is outlined in red, and the plan on the screens in front of you with a box on it. Sorry, there's a box on the screens. You're able to remove that? I'll continue anyway. So it's got Southwell Lane running to the east side, Hayes Road to the north, and it is accessed via Southwell Lane. I've shown you the aerial view of the site, but if we can remove that box, then you'll see the Virtus data center is just to the west of Costco. So I might pause there. Are you able to get it off? Sorry. There we go. Thank you. Oh. Super, thank you very much. So looking back at the aerial view now, I'll show you again on the plan, but Virtus Data Center is the building on the top left-hand corner. So just to the south of the Virtus Data Center is our own household waste recycling facility. And then I've mentioned before, the Quattro facility is in the bottom right block as you look at that aerial view. This is the access to the site. I won't linger on this. It's access via Southwell Lane. That takes you through to the Quattro facility and our own household waste facility. This is the Quattro facility itself. You can see the batching plant on the left-hand side, and then the construction waste facility on the right-hand side. And then this is a view to the north of the site. So this is, you're looking from Southwell Lane down a zone where you can't build on. You're looking at the construction waste recycling facility there, the Tremel, the sorting box. You can see it's all enclosed. Again, now this is from the Costco side of the car park, looking back towards the recycling facility. So you can see again, it's enclosed, and you can see the boundary fence. And this is within the site itself. This is looking at the construction waste facility, and you can see that it's largely enclosed. You can see a lorry unloading into the loading area, which is where the waste is deposited. I'll talk to you a little bit about how it works when I get to the actual plans itself. So this is the proposed block plan. The important bit is the northern side, the batching plant's in the top left-hand corner, and then the waste recycling facilities in the top right-hand corner. So that the biggest box you can see there is where they deposit the waste. The waste then moves through a conveyor belt system, through a trommel, it's through a sorting office, and then deposited at the top right-hand corner. Then the box that you can see just below the batching plant is where they store the aggregates. And then to the south of that, there is parking and various office facilities. This is the batching plant. Not much to look at, to be perfectly honest, but that is what it is. It's a batching plant. Below that are the aggregate bays, so they're just to the south of the batching plant. This is the construction waste facility, and I'll linger on this a little bit because when this came in front of councillors in 2017, there was a first application which was not covered in a similar manner. The members who were present asked for it to be deferred, and then they came back at the next planning committee and they provided this covers facility. So this is broadly what was requested as part of that application process. Similar to that, covered aggregates bays, to have it all covered was one of the key thrusts of the planning committee, and you can see that has taken place within the pictures and the plans here. And the offices to the south of the site, which I won't linger on. And I'm going to flip back through to some of the photos again, just to show you where the proximity of it is and what it looks like. So the reason that it's in front of you tonight is because it's a departure from the local plan. So we've touched on that point. The site within which it's located is allocated within our West London Waste Plan for household waste, not construction waste, and there's a key difference between the two. What's happened is that the West London Waste Authority have confirmed to us that they've got no intention of using the site within their current plans, and they're happy for the time limit for the proposal to be extended. Otherwise, it would pretty much be a vacant site and unused. So there is a departure from the local plan, but pragmatically, there is no actual harm caused as a result of this. That is, of course, subject to this time limit and a condition saying that they need, planning obligation saying that they need to leave the site within 12 months of being told by the West London Waste Authority that we need it for household waste. We touched briefly on noise, although a COSCA representative is not here. The concerns are that they've got an audiology department room where they do hearing tests just to the north of that site. There has been a lot of discussion about what the noise impact on that area is. There are peaks where there is more than 50 decibels in that room, which they suggest is excessive. But we believe that sufficient work has been done by Quattro to minimise as best as possible the impact within that sensitive area. So obviously, tonight, some of the key discussion has been on air quality. Air quality does include dust. I'm going to tentatively suggest, without wanting to put too many words in people's mouths, it's possibly the dust that's the bigger concern here. If it isn't dust being the biggest concerns, air quality is broadly going to be the same from a construction waste facility and a municipal waste facility, household waste facility, because I think most of it's generated from coming and goings on vehicles. That's the nitrous oxide. When it comes to dust, they have got a significant number of measures designed to reduce the impact of the dust. That includes the enclosure of the facilities. There's dust suppression sprays. There is monitoring of it. We are satisfied that that's sufficient to comply with our local plan policies. To have a data centre nearby, a policy don't quite cover that, and as you've been questioning as well, it's really difficult to measure what the impact on that facility is going to be, and indeed how much impact is got from our own municipal waste facility, or indeed a municipal waste facility if it's put on that site as well. So what I will say, what I fall back to, is that there isn't sufficient, we are making recommendations to suggest that there isn't sufficient harm caused in the context of our local plan policies to justify a refusal of this scheme. I'm sure there is a degree of impact, but we're also suggesting that Quattro have now done as much as they can be reasonably requested to do to minimise the impact within that property. So I don't want to question the statements made in terms of the impact on the Virtus data centre. It's just one of those situations that we can't really control as a result of this. So I'll welcome further questions on that if you so wish. But as was mentioned, they have an environmental permit, which is a far harsher judgment on how a facility operates than our own local plan standards. I do quickly need to refer to our addendum, apologies, because the conditions are listed within the addendum, and there are a couple of alterations I need to make to the addendum. One's really small. We need to update the decision drawing numbers, which I'm hoping you'll accept us doing at officer level, just to reflect the plans that are shown online, so the ones that have been consulted on. And there's a condition 6, which is about a crossing on just adjacent to this access site over next to Southall Lane. We can't actually attach that condition. We're recommending it's being removed because it's outside the application site. So that's going to be something that our colleagues at Hounslow Highways are going to engage with Quattro outside of the scope of this application. So we're recommending that condition is actually removed. I will leave my presentation at that then, if that's okay, and welcome questions and any issues that you'd like to question me on.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm just looking around. Any questions for the officer? Councillor Tony Lukey.
Yeah, couple of things. Yeah, why? How come we let this go so far? How come officers let this go so far and not checking on the planning application, not checking that conditions were being met? What's going on? You know, who do we leave this to? This is about monitoring again, isn't it, officers? You know, why wasn't it done? Because there was discussion. There was 2 applications. There's an application that was deferred, and then we came back again. So you were paying some attention at some point, but then as is often, I've got a whole rake of planning enforcement matters in my ward. Once it's done, once it's developed, then you kind of forget about it until someone raises it. So how come the correspondence from the data storage center, or what happened to the correspondence from the data storage center when it came to yourselves? That's the first question, really, Chair. And I've got a couple more.
So we just leave it with that one, and we'll deal with that, and then come back to you.
That's fine. So my understanding was that when the enforcement complaint came in, that was based on the failure to discharge planning conditions and the not in accordance with the approved plans. I would, as it was looked into, it was suggested that the harm caused was not sufficient to justify taking enforcement action when there was this opportunity to regularize the situation. The planning conditions were submitted to us, they were reviewed, and they were deemed to be acceptable, but they could not be discharged on the basis that the construction on site was not in accordance with the approved scheme. So the conditions were looked at, there was an enforcement investigation open, and there were steps to made to regularize it. There is a second part to your question, obviously, which is, can we go down and monitor dust? I don't know if you're asking us to do that, but we can't. But
Chair, I didn't mention dust.
Matthew, thank you,
Sorry.
that's okay.
I didn't mention dust.
No, hold on, hold on. That's, just leave it like that for the moment, Matthew. Councillor Lukey, would you like to do your other questions? And
Yeah, Chair, I'm concerned that words being put in my mouth. But the other thing that's missing here, and why we're allowing this, and if we're allowing this for so many it'll be an 8-year permission. Why isn't there any community infrastructure levy here? Why isn't there any section 106 here? Where this does seem to be, we've seen some developments come and go within that time, but where they have been eligible for these for these conditions and section 106 and SIL. And why can't we, or tell us how we can put some section 106 on this for improved community facilities down in this part of the world, in this most deprived area of the borough?
So I think the reason that we originally didn't have any planning obligations on here was because it was the relocation of an existing facility. So all of the staff were moving with it. So construction training would have been something that I think we would have, generally looked at if it was a brand new scheme. But I think the case was made that they weren't inviting new staff. There really wasn't much construction going on as an assembly. So it wasn't your standard scheme when it came to construction training obligations. My question would be, so we have to obviously recommend planning obligations in accordance with our planning obligation strategy. I do not believe that there are any obligations in terms of infrastructure that we can request as part of this scheme. So obviously I look at it from the viewpoint that we've got a very structured system for planning obligations, and I don't believe it meets any of those requirements. So that would why there's no obligations on there.
Have you checked? How do we know? We haven't got it right so far, Matthew, on this one, have we? So how can we check that there are opportunities for obligations here in Heston West Ward? Contributions. Can't we put a few pennies on a ton of concrete, for example? Because I'll be mindful. I'll come back to that towards the end when we're deciding on what we're going to do with this. But why can't you come up with it, or what's the problem here? You're usually imaginative elsewhere. Why not? The last big plan application we looked at, you were proposing facilities in another ward. Why not here?
Yes, we are a plan-led system, so we base the contributions upon what is written down within the public planning obligation strategy. So we'd have to front-load the situation and create a policy that would require certain obligations to be made. So that's why it's not in this particular application. We'd have to look at front-loading the whole process.
Sorry, what does that mean, front-loading in this context?
So you need a policy on which to base the planning obligations on, the contributions on. You need that policy hook. It would need to be an adopted local plan policy to ask for those contributions.
Matthew, can I ask you a question about the fact that it's been a breach of planning? It's been accepted as a breach of planning, and therefore we now have in front of us a retrospective planning application. Is there no financial, payment that they should be making for breaching planning laws, or is that something that we can't even ask for? Question mark.
No, so the decision making as part of this application has to be without prejudice to any breaches in planning control. The legal framework for breaches in planning control is that we have to first give them every opportunity to regularise the situation before you impose any kind of enforcement penalties on them. So this is them complying with that first step of the legal requirements.
Thank you. Councillor John Todd.
Matthew, thanks for your guidance pre the meeting. Chair, I did email Mr. Rees with queries. I just want to clarify the breach, if you wouldn't mind, Marty. Can I go through your email? Yeah. You said there was a breach in the planning control because they didn't erect a facility in accordance with the approved plans. Now, we know that was linked to our own site. But you did say they did submit applications to discharge the conditions of the original scheme, including air quality and noise. Now, what do you mean by that? Were they then in breach of those two conditions? Was this a remedy, or can you clarify that for me, please?
So they did. So members granted planning permission with these planning conditions attached. They proceeded to submit the information that would have been required to discharge those conditions. So if they had built in accordance with the approved plans, we would have subsequently discharged those conditions based on the information that had been presented to us. But because they had a breach of planning controls in the first place, we couldn't proceed with those discharge condition applications because we would have effectively been discharged and conditioned against a scheme that wasn't implemented. So they provided the information that members asked for as part of the previous planning committee. We just couldn't formally discharge that information.
Because the building itself was irregular.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. You've heard the objector. He made some adequate points, in my view, certainly matters of concern. And yet, in your submission to us, if that's the right expression, you keep coming back to Costello and their audiology department. Given that this complainant, or objector, I should say, has raised a number of very fair points, he's talking about capacity, noise, risk, filtration. What steps has LBH done to confirm or clarify the grounds they raise?
So we haven't monitored noise and dust at Enterson site. That the conditions always required the actual developer to undertake those assessments, and then there was a procedure for submitting to them complaints. So when they received complaints, they were logged. What would or should happen in the future is that we should then, I believe, set up some kind of framework where we liaise with them to discuss any complaints that have happened, and then maybe we can take a step from there. I mean, I think because we didn't receive formal complaints in terms of noise and dust directly to the planning enforcement team outside of the scope of there was a breach in planning controls, that didn't trigger the need to visit the site. More has come out as a result of this planning committee that I think it's fair to say would demonstrate a need for a more active involvement from ourselves, and that's of course fine. That's you can add it to informative if you like, but a system of monitoring is absolutely fine. We can have officers going down there on occasion to check that the enclosures are correct, that what is written on the plans is what the details submitted are indeed being followed through. That's fine, and then we can ask for those complaints, log of complaints, to be forwarded to us, and or for cost converters to contact us directly. That would be the standard procedure for moving forward.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to reject what you just said, and I'll explain why. The objector wrote to the council. The council was on notice that there was a blatant breach, and according to your email, I think planning control were involved as well, or enforcement, or whoever. That's a complaint. The client, a professional, was waiting for a response and didn't get a response. And you now say this committee, ex post facto, is sort of gingering things along. I don't accept that at all. I feel this objector has been grossly treated, very badly treated, and his substantial grounds have been ignored to the favour of someone who is shown to be not only in breach, but reluctant to change. Can I move on from that statement? I mean, if you want to respond, I'm very happy to listen to you. But you heard the applicant's agent saying she was chivied along, I think that's my words, but chivied along to get this application in. What assistance did the council give, and why did you go along with a 4-year extension?
I mean, you make some fair points in terms of the first question, but this whole process is part of the regularising that breaches in the first place, albeit a prolonged one. In terms of timeframes, they gained planning approval in January 2018 and then submitted an application in November 2021. It did only give us 8 weeks to decide the planning application, but it was, November 2020, excuse me. So if we had decided that application within, 8-9 weeks, then they would have been in accordance with the timeframes. We didn't, and it wouldn't a reasonable timeframe. But we're not talking years here. So the suggestion that there were delays as a result of COVID, I don't think that that's particularly unrealistic. And that we're not talking years. We're talking a matter of weeks. So I don't think it's quite as bad as might be the impression currently.
Well, I suppose the bottom line to me is I'm an elected councillor with the mandate to do certain things. If I was asked to go to the objector's client, how can I give him a credible case as to what the council's done in respect of this and the future operation of this site?
So my answer to that would only have to be that we can only do what we can within the context of planning laws and regulations. They have an environmental permit, so they're working in accordance with that. And just entering the Viability Data Centre, I'm tentatively suggesting at this point it's not in breach of any of our local plan policies. It's a data centre. We don't have policies designed to prevent impact on it. So we're doing as best we can to limit that impact, but we don't have enforcement grounds to take action here. There isn't a breach in our local plan policies as a result of this. So of course we would like to do what we can to help Virtus in this case, but we're restricted by what our policies are, the limitations of our own planning policies and the legal framework.
Okay, well, I'm shocked to hear we haven't got a policy dealing with data centres. Why don't we get one? Why haven't we got one? And will you undertake to get one done so we can act on behalf of a viable business in Hounslow, please?
So yeah, that would be part of a supplementary planning document I'd suggest, and yeah, we could look at the sensitivity of the site and go deeper into how they could be protected. That's fine. That's a more of a long-term project. Unfortunately, it's not going to help Virtus with this current scheme. But of course, in 2027, when the scheme expires, were we to approve the scheme, then yeah, we could have something in place for then. I will make that recommendation.
Why have I got to wait 4 years?
If you grant permission today for this application, then there wouldn't be much help. The SPT wouldn't change what you've granted permission for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say there was a lot of talk about enforcement action and it being a retrospective planning application, but you need to consider the planning application. Members need to consider the planning application in front of them tonight. And as the officer said, ignoring the previous breaches. If there's breaches going forward, then the council has powers to enforce against those, but those cannot be reasons to refuse this application tonight. So we need to concentrate on the planning merits of this particular application.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Mel. Sorry, Mel. Sorry.
I was going to forego my question because I've lost the will to live.
Well, in that case, would you like to move on to
No.
discussions, or do you want to ask the question?
I do. I want to ask the question of our legal advisor. How is it that we cannot actually take on board when we're considering whether we approve or otherwise this application? We have to, surely, we're allowed as a planning authority to take into consideration the breaches that have already occurred. I understand planning guidance law, call it as you will, that we are supposed to be monitoring, we're supposed to be deciding on what is in front of us tonight. However, this is a retrospective planning application. If it's retrospective, then we take the garbage that goes with it. In this case, the breaches. I don't understand the advice that we're given.
Obviously, clearly, any breaches are part of the history of the site, and it could transpire because of those breaches. You believe that this planning permission won't overcome it, and members are entitled to do that. But to penalise them in relation to those past breaches, whether it's a householder who's put residents in his outbuilding or whatever, it's the same applies. Otherwise, the process of allowing a retrospective application will fall down. By its very nature, by allowing a retrospective application, it's an attempt to regularize what is there. And this is, as set out in the report, an attempt to regularize that. You may disagree with the contents of the report, and you're entitled to do that, but it cannot be a written reason for refusal that the applicant has previously breached planning control. That cannot be a reason for refusal in itself.
I'll make a comment, Chair, on that. Yeah, can I say I totally agree with your interpretation. Put that all to one side. What we're incapable of doing is accepting some or all of the objectors' points and acting on it. That's the issue. They haven't gone away. He's shown genuine concern. It's a professional one. So I've got to balance what he says against the applicant. To be told there's no policy on the premises neuters this committee's work. And I still feel there must be some redress or some condition that we can put along the lines that Councillor Collins is alluding to. I'll take it no further than that.
Councillor Tony Lukey.
Well, I'd like to, on that basis, I'd like to ask the officers, how could this planning application be improved in order to address the issues that have been raised with regards to dust and impact, noise, vibration, and other impacts on neighbouring buildings. What can be done there, which is not in the application already?
Matthew.
So my suggestion would be that the collaborative monitoring of the situation. So we're members minded to do so. I'm sure we could add a planning condition that requires the submission of approach to monitoring the situation and engagement with Virtus and Costco in doing so. I believe that the information they've provided is sufficient to demonstrate there wouldn't be harm to neighbouring properties. The question maybe remains, are they actually following through with what they've stated? So if there's a monitoring framework, would that appease the situation somewhat?
Well, it might be, but it's all right having a monitoring framework. It's like everything else. If your people are not going to be doing it, not going to be monitoring, or not going to be following it up, or not going to be requesting the information or chasing it, then what's the point in having that that condition, Matthew?
If it's as part of a planning condition, then if Virtus were to complain about us not implementing that monitoring framework, then there would be a breach in planning control. So if you attach it to a planning condition, then there would be a breach. It wouldn't just be an enforcement issue, it would be a breach in planning control, and therefore you'd have more effective enforcement against it.
And will their letters be answered?
Yes.
And can we make sure it's just not Costco? Because it's actually not Costco that's complaining about the dust going into the building, is it? Costco are complaining about noise more, it seems to me anyway. But I think we make that condition really, really hard, really difficult. Right, I have two people who wish to either, not a question, Richard, this is discussion, yes?
Well, I'm not quite sure because
Okay, well,
I'm
go ahead
confused
anyway.
Because I never heard any solid evidence that, for instance, the dust was tested to see whether it contained concrete dust or whether it was dust coming off a highway. I don't know. So it'd be very difficult to draw a conclusion to that. There is evidence in there that comments about noise affecting was traced back to times of the day when this centre wasn't open. It's the middle of the night when the market was open. It's to make the kind of conclusions and go forward with it. The evidence isn't there or wasn't given. There might be some evidence, but it certainly hasn't been given to us tonight.
Sorry, Chair, it was explained. It was explained by the objector, saying how hang on, sorry,
Don't tell me to hang on, Tony.
Well,
it
all right.
wasn't.
Oh, hold on,
Yes,
hold
it
on,
was.
hold on.
He
both
said
of you.
there was a significant change after the building opened.
Councillor Lukey,
So
please.
you weren't listening.
Councillor Lukey, please. Councillor Lukey and Councillor Richard Foote, please. I know time is late. Okay. I think the thing is that one of the questions that we did have was there were no official complaints, but there was one complaint lodged with the council which didn't seem to be dealt with. And that's obviously a problem that needs to be looked at, presumably by the department, to see what on earth happened there. That's a separate issue, I suspect. But I think I'm looking at the objector and saying, I think probably a lot more complaints should be issued, making them formally if there are complaints, rather than trying to get on with a good neighbourly thing. Because I think sometimes being good neighbours to each other, the person receiving the problem and they don't complain. And then when you come to investigate it, there's no complaints list. We've had this before in all sorts of issues. I think perhaps maybe they need to make more complaints, which would be perfectly acceptable, I imagine, to the company asking for this. So that's the first thing. Now, okay, nobody knows what the dust is. It hasn't been compared, but from now on, it can be looked at, I'm sure. So can we now move on and and if there's anybody who wants to make, Councillor Michael Dennis first and then Councillor John Todd.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm probably, Councillor Todd might mention this as well, but from Councillor Todd's questioning, there might, moving forward, there might be an option for a condition to have those officers going to the site to make those tests that you mentioned.
Chair, great minds think alike. I feel that I can't adequately represent this individual here and the council without more details. I really think if we adjourn this for another month or the next hearing to allow the objector to provide further and better information and for our learned planning officer to reflect on the various options he can. And I say that without any criticism of the solicitor on the basis I readily accept that what's happened previously is not germane to this hearing.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Guy Lambert.
We've had some discussion about monitoring, but at present, I'm not quite sure what we would be monitoring. So I'm minded at this point to suggest that we defer. It's not something I normally do. I normally leave this to my ward colleague and friend, Councillor Collins. That we defer a decision on this. We find some way of defining what is a level of dust that is acceptable or unacceptable, and that we monitor that. Or we have a regime for monitoring that, because otherwise, what if we say we're monitoring? What are we monitoring? It'll be smelly, but how smelly? How smelly is bad enough to to be an objective concern. So that's my. So I move deferral on that basis.
Okay, thank you for that. Prior to us saying it, doing anything, I just wanted to check because I'd missed Balraj off, and he was actually had his hand up a lot before 3 other people. So I do apologise for that. So would you like to say whatever it was you were going to say, and then I'll then take the deferral. You're okay, are you? You sure? Okay. So I do apologise to you. Okay, so we have deferral on the table. Right. Okay. So I'm going to go round. Okay. I'll start with Councillor John Todd.
Councillor John Todd, Homefield Ward, agree defer.
Okay. Councillor Michael Dennis.
Michael Dennis, Chiswick Riverside Ward. I'm going to abstain on this one.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Ajmed Gurul.
Yeah, I'll go with the deferral.
Councillor Alan Mitchell.
Feltom West, yes, agreeing with deferral.
Thank you. Councillor Harleen Atwahir. Did you hear that? Thank you. Councillor Mel Collins. Okay. Councillor Balraj Sarah.
Deferral.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Lukey. Councillor Guy Lambert.
Defer.
Councillor Richard Foote.
Defer.
Councillor, sorry. Falling over my words here.
Samia Chowdhury.
Samia, I do know. So I do apologise, Samia.
Fine. Defer. Yeah, I'm agreeing with the deferral. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that sounds to me like the best move. And we will need I know we have a time limit on this, Matthew. I'm aware of that, but it might be that we can actually move that a bit faster forward. Okay, something we may have to discuss. But
when you say move faster forward, sorry, are you suggesting a time it comes back to planning committee? It will be the July committee at the earliest.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, if it can be, and if not, we'll go for the August one. But I want it back fairly fast because I'm sure we can sort. There needs to be something sorted out and done fairly quickly. So thank you very much indeed for that. Right. Okay. There are, just to say, there are no other matters of business which I consider urgent. Date of the next meeting is the 24th of June, 2021. We will be here as again, and we will be. I'll make sure that everybody on committee is aware that it's not a Teams or Zoom meeting. Okay, so thank you all very much indeed for your attendance, and good night.